Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝗔𝗂𝘗𝐵 222 on Wattpad. Now let's start. Sitting across from Aizawa in the dimly lit counseling room, a mix of unease and exhaustion washed over me. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, nightmares, and difficult conversations. Now, I faced yet another challenge in the form of Shoto Aizawa, better known as Eraserhead. He had a reputation for being blunt, no-nonsense, and incredibly perceptive, the kind of person who could see right through any facade. I felt nervous. Aizawa sat in his chair, his eyes half-lidded in that usual, almost lazy way of his. But I knew better. Behind that sleepy expression was a mind constantly analyzing and evaluating. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick file, dropping it on the desk between us with a soft thud. My eyes darted to the file, a sense of dread creeping in. I couldn't hide the anxiety in my voice as I asked what it was. Aizawa didn't look up immediately. Instead, he flipped open the file, his eyes scanning the pages within. He stated flatly that it was my file, containing a detailed account of all my possible mental health issues provided by the hospital. I swallowed hard. I had known something like this was coming, but seeing the actual file, thick with pages of reports, diagnoses, and observations, made it all too real. I echoed his words, my voice barely above a whisper, asking if it contained all my mental issues. Aizawa nodded, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was no judgment in them, just unwavering seriousness. He confirmed that the hospital hadn't left anything out. I could feel my hands trembling slightly, and I clenched them into fists to stop the shaking. I asked how bad it was, though a part of me didn't want to know the answer. He didn't sugarcoat it. Aizawa never did. He replied that it was extensive, but that was why we were there, to address these issues, help me understand them, and hopefully manage them. My heart sank at the word, extensive. I had always known I wasn't okay, but hearing it confirmed like this, knowing there were pages detailing just how broken I was overwhelming. I braced myself for the worst as I asked what it said. Aizawa sighed softly, flipping through the pages as he began to list off the diagnoses. He started with the obvious, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Given everything I had been through, it was a given. The hospital reports indicated that I experienced frequent flashbacks, nightmares, and episodes of severe anxiety related to my time in captivity. I winced, remembering the vivid nightmares that still haunted my sleep, the way I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if I were still trapped in that facility. I muttered that it sounded about right, my voice heavy with resignation. Aizawa continued, his tone steady and clinical. He mentioned evidence of CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. This was a result of prolonged trauma, manifesting in more pervasive ways. It wasn't just about the nightmares or flashbacks, it was about how I interacted with the world and related to myself and others. I had developed deep-seated feelings of worthlessness, shame, and guilt. I had become hypervigilant, always on edge, constantly expecting danger or betrayal. I bit my lip, trying to keep my emotions in check. Every word he spoke felt like a knife digging deeper into the wounds I had tried so hard to ignore. I admitted quietly that I didn't know it had a name, thinking it was just normal for me. Aizawa shook his head, stating that it wasn't normal. It was a result of the trauma I had endured and something that needed to be addressed, or it would continue to affect every aspect of my life. I nodded numbly, unable to find the words to respond. The weight of what he was saying was suffocating, but I knew he was right. I couldn't keep ignoring it, pretending that I was okay when I clearly wasn't. He flipped to another page, his expression growing more somber. He informed me that there was also major depressive disorder. The hospital noted that I had exhibited symptoms of this for a long time, possibly even before the events that led to my captivity. It was characterized by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and a lack of interest in activities I once enjoyed. I had also shown signs of suicidal ideation. The mention of those thoughts made my breath hitch. I had tried to keep those dark thoughts at bay, but there were times, especially during the worst of it, when I wondered if it would just be easier to let it all end. I didn't want to admit it, but hearing Izuku say it out loud made it impossible to deny. I whispered that I never thought it was that bad, my voice trembling. Izuku's gaze softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. He said it was understandable, given everything I had been through. But it was important to recognize those feelings for what they were and to get the help needed to manage them. I nodded, though the idea of opening up about those thoughts terrified me. I knew I couldn't keep running from it if I wanted to survive. I asked what else was there, dreading the answer. He flipped to another section of the file. He mentioned evidence of dissociative symptoms. The hospital noted that I had experienced moments of feeling disconnected from myself or my surroundings, almost as if I were watching everything from outside my body. This was a common response to severe trauma, especially when the mind was trying to protect itself from overwhelming stress. I nodded slowly, the memories of those dissociative episodes coming to the forefront of my mind. There were times when I felt like I was floating above everything, watching as if it were all happening to someone else. It was both a relief and a curse, a way to escape the pain but also a reminder of just how broken I had become. I admitted that I had felt that, my voice hollow. Izuku continued, his voice steady. He mentioned anxiety disorder. The hospital reports indicated that I experienced frequent panic attacks, often triggered by memories of my trauma or by situations that reminded me of my captivity. I had also developed agoraphobia, a fear of being in situations where I felt trapped or unable to escape. This had led to me avoiding certain places or situations, further isolating myself. A lump formed in my throat as I thought about why I preferred living in the sewer. The panic attacks had been some of the worst moments. The way my chest would tighten, my breathing would become erratic, and I would feel like the walls were closing in on me. It was a suffocating, paralyzing fear that left me feeling powerless and ashamed. Izuku admitted he didn't know how to make it stop, his voice barely above a whisper. Izuku nodded, his expression understanding. He explained that they were there to help Izuku understand what was happening to him and to provide the tools to manage it. A wave of exhaustion washed over Izuku, the weight of everything he was hearing pressing down on him. He asked if there was more, unsure if he could handle any additional information. Izuku hesitated for a moment before confirming there was more to discuss. He revealed that the hospital had noted signs of hypervigilance and paranoia. Izuku had become overly cautious, always on guard, constantly expecting danger even in safe situations. This had led to trust issues, making it difficult for him to form or maintain relationships. Izuku also mentioned signs of anger management issues, particularly when Izuku felt threatened or cornered. Izuku clenched his fists, the words hitting too close to home. He had always prided himself on staying calm under pressure, but there were times when he felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. The trust issues had become a constant in his life. He reflected on how he had pushed so many people away, feeling a pang of guilt. Izuku calmly explained that it was a defense mechanism. Izuku had been hurt many times, building walls to protect himself, but those walls also kept out people who wanted to help him. Izuku nodded, knowing Izuku was right but still feeling conflicted. Letting people in was risky, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to take that risk. He asked if there was anything else, hoping they were nearing the end of the discussion. Izuku flipped to the last section of the file, his expression serious. He mentioned evidence of survivor's guilt, noting that Izuku had shown signs of feeling responsible for the deaths or suffering of others, even when it wasn't his fault. This had led to feelings of unworthiness, self-blame, and a belief that he didn't deserve to be happy or safe. Izuku felt his chest tighten at the mention of survivor's guilt. Memories flooded back of all the people he couldn't save, the burden he had carried for so long. The faces of those he couldn't protect haunted him, constantly reminding him of his failures. Even in that room, he felt their weight pressing down on him. He looked down at his hands, noticing how they trembled slightly. He admitted he had always felt like it was his fault, thinking that if he had been stronger, faster, or better, maybe they wouldn't have died. Izuku's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. He told Izuku that he couldn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't responsible for every bad thing that happened. He had done his best with the information and abilities he had at the time. Blaming himself for things outside of his control would only eat him alive. Izuku understood the logic, but the guilt was deeply ingrained in him, making it hard to let go. He expressed that it felt like he should have done more, even though he knew he had done everything he could. Aizawa leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. He explained that it wasn't about letting it go but accepting that he was human and had limits. The fact that he felt guilt showed that he cared deeply and wanted to make a difference. However, if he let it consume him, he would lose himself in the process. Taking a deep breath, Izuku asked what he should do, feeling lost. He wanted to know how to stop the cycle of guilt and self-blame. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. He explained that it wouldn't be easy and would take time and effort. Izuku would need to work through these feelings, possibly with the help of a therapist. He would need to confront his trauma, understand it, and find a way to live with it. The first step was acknowledging that he couldn't do this alone and that needing help was okay. The idea of therapy had always felt daunting to Izuku, as if admitting he was too weak to handle things on his own. But sitting there, hearing Aizawa lay everything out plainly, he realized he was already at his breaking point. He couldn't keep pretending he was fine when he was anything but. He asked Aizawa if he thought he could get better, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. Aizawa looked at him with a rare softness in his eyes and expressed that he believed Izuku had the potential to heal. However, it would be a long, hard road. He would have to face some dark parts of himself and be willing to accept help from those who cared about him. If he was willing to do that, Aizawa believed he could get better. Izuku felt a sense of relief mixed with deep-seated fear. The thought of opening up and letting people in was terrifying, but the alternative, continuing down his current path, was even worse. He admitted he didn't know if he could do this or if he was strong enough. Aizawa's expression remained serious, but there was encouragement in his tone. He explained that strength wasn't just about physical power or winning battles. It was about having the courage to face fears and confront demons, even when it was frightening. Izuku had already shown incredible strength by surviving everything he had been through. Now, it was time to show that strength in a different way. Izuku nodded, though fear still lingered. He questioned what would happen if he failed or couldn't handle it. Aizawa didn't hesitate, assuring him that if he fell, he would get back up and try again. Healing wasn't a linear process. There would be setbacks and times when he felt like he wasn't making progress. But every step forward, no matter how small, was still progress. He reminded Izuku that he wasn't alone in this. He had people who cared about him and wanted to see him succeed. Aizawa's words felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to amidst the storm raging inside him. Aizawa thought about the situation, recognizing the fear his student had regarding discussions about mental health. He understood that he needed to monitor Izuku closely to ensure his well-being. Aizawa nodded slightly, offering a small sign of approval. He reminded Izuku that taking things one day at a time was all anyone could ask for and emphasized that he didn't have to face this alone. Izuku looked down at the file on the table, feeling its weight lessen. He expressed his gratitude quietly, acknowledging everything Aizawa had done for him. Aizawa stood up, gathering the file in his hands, and returned to his usual businesslike demeanor. He assured Izuku that they would check in regularly and encouraged him to reach out if he ever needed to talk, reinforcing their support. Izuku nodded, a mix of hope and fear swirling within him. The path ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of possibility. As Aizawa turned to leave, Izuku found his voice, trembling yet more resolved. He declared that he didn't want to be defined by his past and expressed his longing to move forward and be proud of who he was. Aizawa paused at the door, giving a rare approving nod and simply stated that this was where Izuku should start, taking one step at a time. With that, he left the room, the door closing softly behind him. Izuku sat in silence for a moment, comforted by its familiarity. The weight of the file and everything he had been carrying still lingered, but a new resolve began to blossom within him. He knew he couldn't continue living in the shadows of his past. He had to find a way to heal and move forward, even if it was the hardest journey he had ever faced. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could find peace within himself. He awoke to the familiar warmth of Nomiuri beside him. Since she had started sleeping in the same bed, the relentless nightmares that once haunted him had ceased. The vivid memories of Dr. Kuroki and the terrifying experiments faded into the background when he was enveloped in the comfort of her presence, which had become an unexpected source of solace. His therapy sessions with Aizawa and Nomiuri continued steadily. Aizawa's approach was direct, urging him to confront his darkness, while Nomiuri offered a softer, more empathetic ear. Izuku found he could share things with her that he had never revealed to anyone else. During one session, Izuku opened up about his childhood, the neglect from his parents and the cruel treatment from his twin sister. He hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of shame and fear, but Nomiuri's patient silence and unwavering gaze encouraged him to continue. He spoke of feeling inadequate, no matter how hard he tried to gain his parents' approval. His father barely acknowledged him, and his mother was always preoccupied with his sister, who seemed to embody everything they desired. Nomiuri listened intently, her heart aching for the boy before her. She could see the pain in his words and the way his hands trembled as he spoke. He continued, recounting how his friends turned against him when it became clear he was quirkless. The betrayal cut deep, especially from those he had trusted. The cruelty he faced pushed him to the brink, leading him to run away. As he spoke, Izuku's breath hitched, struggling to maintain his composure. Nomiuri felt a surge of anger and protectiveness at the injustices he had endured. He revealed that his escape had led to his kidnapping, and everything that transpired afterward was a consequence of that moment. Nomiuri could no longer remain silent. She leaned forward, her voice filled with barely contained emotion, affirming that those who had hurt him did not deserve him. What they had done was unforgivable. Izuku nodded, still downcast, expressing his struggle to not feel responsible for the cruelty he faced. He wished he could have been stronger, that having a quirk might have changed everything. Nomiuri gently placed her hand over his, reminding him that he couldn't blame himself for the actions of others. He was a child who deserved love and support, not to be treated as worthless. When he finally looked up, tears filled his eyes as he admitted he couldn't stop thinking about the past and the faces that haunted him. Nomiuri's heart broke for him. She wished she could erase his pain, but she knew her role was to support him through this journey. She assured him that he wasn't alone and that they would work through it together. Izuku nodded, feeling a fragile thread of hope amidst the weight of his trauma. Nomiuri leaned in closer, her voice gentle yet firm, reminding him that his past did not define him. He was strong, brave, and kind, having survived challenges that would have broken many. She encouraged him not to let the past trap him, assuring him that he had a future ahead, one not determined by those who had hurt him. Izuku felt a spark of determination ignite within him, a flicker of hope that had long been buried beneath self-doubt. He expressed his gratitude for her belief in him, and Nomiuri smiled, her eyes filled with warmth and fierce protectiveness, affirming her unwavering support. Aizawa reminded them both to be cautious, aware that pushing too hard could have consequences. As Izuku left, Nizu entered to check on their progress. Nomiuri glanced at Aizawa, concern evident in her eyes. She expressed her worries about Izuku's emotional fragility, noting that he was strong but hanging on by a thread. Aizawa met her gaze and assured her that he would do everything in his power to protect him. Nizu nodded in agreement, his mind already working through various scenarios. He emphasized the need for a strategic approach, stating that Izuku's rehabilitation was their top priority and they couldn't allow anyone, especially those who had previously hurt him, to derail his progress. Nomiuri sighed, feeling slightly reassured by their support. She expressed her care for Izuku, acknowledging the hardships he had faced and his right to heal and live without fear. Nizu observed the dynamic between them with a knowing smile, remarking on their closeness. Nomiuri felt her cheeks warm at the implication, trying to brush it off by saying she was simply helping him. Aizawa, however, noted the positive impact Nomiuri had on Izuku, admitting that he had opened up more in just a few days than he had during months of therapy. Nomiuri's blush deepened, but she understood the seriousness of Aizawa's words. She reflected on the sessions with Izuku, realizing the depth of what he had revealed. It was more than she had anticipated, but she was determined to continue helping him, even if it was challenging. Before the conversation could delve deeper, Nizu redirected their focus to the upcoming term at UA and inquired about Izuku's rehabilitation progress. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he reported that Izuku was responding positively, though still guarded. Nizu asked Nomiuri about her sessions, and she took a moment to gather her thoughts. She shared the difficult truths Izuku had revealed about his past, including neglect from his parents and bullying from his peers. As she spoke, her eyes reflected a simmering anger at the injustices he had faced. Nizu acknowledged the troubling nature of Izuku's experiences and the potential problems they could face with the new term approaching. Aizawa's expression hardened as he voiced his concerns about the students who had tormented Izuku being in the same class. He had attempted to reject their enrollment, but the Public Safety Commission had overruled him. Nomiuri clenched her fists at the thought, recognizing the need for caution to prevent Izuku from being pushed over the edge. Nizu emphasized the importance of playing the cards they were dealt and turned his attention to Aizawa, suggesting that he keep a close watch on those students. Aizawa smirked at the idea, knowing his reputation for expelling students. He agreed to ensure they stayed in line, expressing his determination to protect Izuku. Nizu thanked both of them for their efforts, acknowledging the significant impact they had made on Izuku's life. Nomiuri nodded, her resolve strengthening as she affirmed that Izuku deserved their support. As they left Nizu's office, Aizawa remarked to Nomiuri that they both had their work cut out for them. She smiled softly, filled with determination, and agreed that they were both up for the challenge. Later that day, Nomiuri entered Izuku's room, finding him lying on his bed with a book in his hands. The soft glow of the evening sun filtered through the window, casting a warm light across the room. Izuku looked up as Nomiuri entered, his expression neutral, though she could sense the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was glad to see her. She greeted him warmly, and he nodded slightly, asking if she needed anything. She shook her head with a smile, suggesting they go out, just the two of them. Izuku frowned in confusion, recalling the rules about needing a supervisor. Nomiuri grinned mischievously, declaring that she was his supervisor and they were going out. He blinked, processing her words, and simply agreed, placing his book down on the nightstand. She handed him a pass and a location that allowed him to leave the school. Dressed in a red and black jacket and black briefs, Izuku felt a rush of embarrassment at her provocative outfit, even outside her hero persona. He held his nose tightly, trying to avoid her gaze, especially as he noticed the attention she drew from the other men nearby. Feeling flustered, he suggested they just go, not wanting to dwell on the situation any longer. As he walked away, holding her hand, Nomiuri teased him about his reaction, noticing how he turned red. Their first stop was a small cafe in the city. Nomiuri ordered a couple of drinks and some pastries, and they settled at a cozy table by the window. The cafe buzzed with activity, the chatter of customers and the clinking of dishes creating a lively atmosphere. As they sipped their drinks, Nomiuri noticed Izuku's eyes wandering, taking in the sights and sounds around him. It was clear he wasn't used to being out in public like this, and she could see the curiosity and apprehension in his gaze. She broke the silence, commenting on how nice it was outside. Izuku nodded thoughtfully, agreeing with her. They continued to talk casually, with Nomiuri guiding the conversation with light-hearted topics. She teased him gently, making small jokes and playful comments that earned her a few huffs of mock annoyance from him. It was nice to see him relax, even if only a little. After leaving the cafe, they wandered through the city, stopping at various shops and attractions. At a bookstore, Izuku spent a considerable amount of time browsing the shelves, and then they visited a small park where they sat on a bench, watching the world go by. At one point they entered a toy store. Nomiuri picked up a cute plush bear and waved it in front of Izuku with a teasing grin, suggesting it would look great on his bed. His face turned red as he tried to ignore her, but she could see the faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He muttered that he wasn't a kid, but there was no bite to his words. She chuckled, placing the plushie back on the shelf, assuring him she was just having some fun. As they continued their walk through the city, Nomiuri pointed out interesting sights and made playful comments that brought more color to Izuku's usually neutral expression. The city was alive with vibrant energy, and for a while, it felt like they were in their own little world. As the sun began to set, Nomiuri guided Izuku to a quiet spot overlooking the city, where the view was breathtaking. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, blending together in a magical scene. They stood in silence for a few moments, taking it all in. Nomiuri glanced over at Izuku, noticing how the soft light of the sunset highlighted the subtle changes in his expression. He seemed more at ease, as if the weight he usually carried was a little lighter now. She gently reminded him that sometimes it was good to take a moment and breathe, acknowledging that life could be overwhelming but that moments like this were important. Izuku nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon, quietly contemplating her words. She smiled softly, feeling warmth in her chest at the progress he was making. They stood there a little longer, watching as the sky gradually darkened and the city lights began to twinkle below them. The atmosphere was serene, almost as if time had slowed down just for them. Eventually, Nomiuri turned to Izuku with a playful glint in her eyes, suggesting they grab something to eat before heading back. He hesitated for a moment but then nodded in agreement. She led him to a small, cozy restaurant not far from where they were. The place had a warm, inviting atmosphere, with soft lighting and comfortable seating. They found a table near the back, away from the main crowd, and settled in. The conversation over dinner was light and relaxed, with Nomiuri doing most of the talking, sharing stories and making jokes that occasionally brought a small smile to Izuku's face. She noticed how he seemed more at ease, responding a little more openly, even if it was just with a nod or a few words. It was progress, and she was grateful for it. As they finished their meal and were about to leave, Nomiuri suddenly had an idea. Leaning across the table with a mischievous smile, she told Izuku she wanted to show him something. He blinked in surprise, asking what it was. With a wink, she encouraged him to follow her. She led him out of the restaurant and down winding streets until they reached a secluded park, surrounded by tall trees and filled with the soft glow of fireflies dancing in the evening air. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise as he looked around, marveling at the beauty of the place. Nomiuri smiled, pleased with his reaction, and mentioned that it was one of her favorite spots in the city. They wandered through the park, the fireflies flickering around them like tiny stars. The atmosphere was calm and magical, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them in this serene corner of the city. Eventually, they found a bench near a small pond, and Nomiuri sat down, motioning for Izuku to join her. He hesitated for a moment before sitting down next to her, his gaze fixed on the water. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace and quiet. Nomiuri glanced over at Izuku, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She could see the progress he was making, the small but significant changes in his demeanor. He was still guarded, still carrying the weight of everything he'd been through, but there was a lightness to him now, a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. After a few minutes, Nomiuri broke the silence, her voice soft. She expressed her happiness about their time together, and Izuku responded with a thoughtful acknowledgement. Nomiuri smiled, feeling warmth in her chest at his words. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, encouraging him and acknowledging his progress. Izuku looked down, a faint blush coloring his cheeks as he thanked her. Nomiuri's heart skipped a beat at the sight of his blush, and she leaned in closer, gently cupping his cheek and tilting his face toward hers. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. In a spontaneous moment, Nomiuri closed the distance between them, sharing a soft, gentle kiss. It was a brief, tender moment that sent a jolt of electricity through both of them. When Nomiuri pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her heart racing. She could see the surprise and confusion in Izuku's eyes, his own cheeks tinged with a deep blush. She stammered, unsure of why she had acted that way, and apologized if she had made him uncomfortable. Izuku blinked, still processing what had just happened, and managed to express his surprise. A wave of relief washed over Nomiuri, though her heart was still pounding. She explained that she hadn't meant to surprise him and that she had gotten caught up in the moment. Izuku reassured her that it was okay, though he admitted he hadn't been expecting it. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both processing the unexpected turn of events. The air between them was thick with unspoken feelings, emotions neither of them knew how to express. Finally, 𝗵𝗎𝗓 broke the silence, speaking sincerely about how much she cared for him and how glad she was to have gotten to know him. Izuku looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions, and reciprocated her feelings, acknowledging how much she had helped him. 𝗵𝗎𝗓 smiled, her heart swelling with warmth at his words, and assured him she would always be there for him. They sat there a little longer, the awkwardness gradually fading away, replaced by a comfortable silence. The night air was cool, and the fireflies danced around them, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the park. Eventually, 𝗵𝗎𝗓 stood up, offering Izuku her hand and suggesting they head back as it was getting late. Izuku took her hand, allowing her to help him up, and they began their walk back to the school. As they walked side by side, 𝗵𝗎𝗓 felt a sense of contentment. The day had been full of surprises, but it had brought them closer together. She knew there was still a long road ahead for Izuku, but she was determined to be there for him every step of the way. As they made their way back, she couldn't help but smile, knowing this was just the beginning of something special. Later that night, Izuku lay in bed, his thoughts racing. His heart was still pounding from the kiss, the feeling of 𝗵𝗎𝗓's lips on his lingering in his mind. He pondered what it meant, feeling a mix of excitement and confusion. He had always imagined how a first kiss would be, but this was completely unexpected. Doubts crept in as he worried about whether he had done it right. He let out a deep sigh, staring up at the ceiling. 𝗵𝗎𝗓 had fallen asleep beside him, her presence warm and comforting despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. He wondered why she, a pro-hero, would want anything to do with him. Closing his eyes, he willed himself to sleep, though questions continued to swirl in his mind. Eventually, exhaustion took over and he drifted off. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a strange, hazy place, surrounded by a soft, ambient light. Looking down, he was confused to see a younger version of himself, dressed in his old all-might pajamas, the ones he wore when dreaming of becoming a hero. His heart sank as he noticed two other versions of himself nearby. The first was him in that facility, looking worn and weary, reflecting the pain he had endured. The sight of that version of himself made his stomach churn. The other figure was a twisted version of himself, clad in a dark outfit, glaring with disdain and cold amusement. Izuku muttered to himself, dreading the answer to what was happening. The twisted version scoffed, claiming this was not a nightmare but a dream of his inner reflection. The younger version chimed in with enthusiasm, declaring they were there to tell him about his new path. The twisted version rolled his eyes, dismissing the theatrics. Izuku felt taken aback by the unexpected turn of events as the weary version stepped forward, struggling to speak. He was not asking Izuku to be a pro-hero, and the words were barely a whisper. Izuku was surprised, not expecting this revelation. The playful energy of the younger version of Izuku contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere as he interjected, reminding everyone of their previous discussions. Nemesis sneered, his tone filled with disdain, causing the younger Izuku to shrink back, his smile fading into a frown. Nemesis turned his icy gaze toward the older Izuku, sending a shiver down his spine. He spoke coldly, devoid of warmth or sympathy, questioning Izuku's motivations for becoming Nemesis. Izuku felt anger and fear bubbling within him, struggling to contain the rage that threatened to spill over. He shot back, demanding to know what Nemesis truly understood about him. Facility Izuku let out a weary sigh, rubbing his temples as if dealing with a persistent headache, reminding Izuku that they were all parts of him, just different versions shaped by time and experience. Nemesis dismissed Izuku's anger, pointing out that he had once beaten villains to the brink of hospitalization and that soon after, he had crossed a line he could never return from. Facility Izuku continued, his tone filled with resigned acceptance, echoing the painful truth that Izuku had tried to ignore. Izuku turned away, trying to block out their words, but they echoed relentlessly in his mind. The younger Izuku's voice cut through the silence, soft yet piercing, reminding him of his deep-seated longing to be a pro-hero. Izuku shouted in denial, his voice cracking under the strain, but even as he spoke, he felt the hollowness of his own words. Nemesis shook his head, a smirk on his lips as he pointed out the irony of Izuku's situation. He had become Nemesis to embody strength, yet here he was, sad, broken and alone, still lying to himself. Frustration and confusion swirled within Izuku, threatening to consume him. He lashed out, questioning Nemesis's understanding of symbols, aware that it was a foolish question to ask. Facility Izuku remained unfazed, looking at Izuku with tired, haunted eyes filled with a sadness he couldn't comprehend. He reminded Izuku that they were all parts of him, still searching for their true identity. Izuku felt his resolve crumbling under the weight of their words, knowing deep down that they were right. Nemesis stepped forward, his expression serious, emphasizing that they represented different core aspects of Izuku. The real question was which aspect he truly was. Izuku stood there, staring at the three versions of himself, grappling with his identity. The child in all-might pajamas, the broken boy from the facility, and the vengeful figure of Nemesis were all parts of him, but what did that mean? He looked at each of them, his thoughts a tangled mess of fear, confusion, and something deeper that he had yet to confront. Nemesis's question echoed in his mind, challenging him to discover his true self. He didn't have an answer yet, but he realized this was more than a dream, it was a call to action to figure out who he really was and what path he would take moving forward. As terrifying as it was, he knew he couldn't keep running from it. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, acknowledging that he didn't have all the answers but was determined to find them. The younger Izuku smiled, filled with hope, while Facility Izuku nodded with a glimmer of pride. Nemesis watched him, his expression unreadable but hinting at approval. The dream began to fade, the figures of his other selves dissolving into darkness, but their words lingered in his mind as he drifted back into the void. Upon waking, he felt the warmth of Nemuri hugging him protectively, as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. He shifted slightly, trying to get her attention. He whispered her name, but there was no response as she nuzzled closer. He tried again, a bit louder this time, and she stirred, her voice muffled against his chest as she reminded him to call her Nemuri. Embarrassed, he apologized and expressed his longing to share something important. Nemuri propped herself up, her eyes half-lidded with sleepiness, curious about what he had to say. Taking a deep breath, he revealed his wish to become a pro-hero. Her eyes widened in shock, confusion and surprise evident on her face. She had expected him to harbor resentment towards heroes, but it was more complicated than that. He didn't hate them, he just struggled to trust them after everything he had been through. Yet there were still a few heroes he believed in, Nizu, Midnight, and Aizawa, those who had truly saved him. When she asked why, her voice barely a whisper, he could see the concern in her eyes, worried that this was just another way for him to punish himself. But he assured her it was not. He began to explain how he had been lying to himself about his motivations for becoming Nemesis. He had told himself it was about revenge and calming his anger, but the truth was that he wanted to save others like him, children cast out and forgotten by society. Unfortunately, he had lost his way along the journey. Izuku wanted to protect those who had no one else, but somehow he lost sight of that vision. All he cared about was hurting the monsters that preyed on the vulnerable. He could see the wheels turning in Nemuri's mind, her eyes narrowing as she pieced things together. She was sharp and understood more than most people gave her credit for. As Nemesis, he focused on people like human traffickers who took children, the homeless, and the vulnerable that society had abandoned. In a way, he was trying to prevent them from ending up like him, transformed into something nightmarish. Nemuri was quiet, her gaze fixed on him, and he could see the emotions swirling behind her eyes, surprise, sadness, pride. He had been lying to himself for so long, admitting that he had failed as Nemesis. Yes, he saved people, but he lost sight of what it truly meant. He didn't care about saving them like he did before, he just wanted those criminals to pay at all costs. So, he wanted to try as a hero. For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes wide with shock, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Just 3 days of therapy, she thought inwardly, her mind racing. It seemed too good to be true, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just saying this, he meant it. Then, suddenly she was on him, hugging him tightly, her arms wrapped around his neck. He could feel her shaking slightly, overwhelmed by emotion. To his utter shock, she kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. His heart skipped a beat, and his mind reeled. She whispered against his lips, expressing her pride in him. Her words hit him hard, and he felt a lump forming in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of affection or warmth. It was overwhelming, yet amazing. Someone was actually proud of him, and he questioned whether he deserved this. But there was something he needed to know. His mind was spinning, emotions all over the place, and he felt panic creeping in. He had to understand what was happening between them. He stammered, trying to find the right words to ask about their relationship. His face heated up with embarrassment. He wasn't good with love or romance. It was all foreign to him. He had been trained in combat, strategy, and survival, but love was something he could never figure out. As for the opposite 𝐬𝐶, he felt utterly clueless. 𝗵𝗎𝐸 pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes, searching for something. She softly told him that she didn't mind being with him if that was what he was asking. His heart skipped another beat, and it took a moment for her words to sink in. He began to express his concerns about their differences, but before he could finish, she silenced him with a kiss. She firmly told him to stop doubting himself, reminding him that he was Izuku Midoriya. He had been through hell and was still standing, which was more than most people could say. She cared about him, and he needed to stop doubting himself. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and he could feel the truth and sincerity in them. He sat in the dimly lit office, filled with an uneasy silence as he stared down at his hands, fidgeting with the edges of his sleeves. Aizawa stood in front of him, arms crossed, his eyes sharp and observant as always. Beside him, Principal Nizu sat at his desk, his small form almost dwarfed by the large chair. Midnight, or rather 𝗵𝗎𝐸, was next to him, her presence a comforting warmth, gently rubbing his back in slow, soothing circles. Aizawa began, his voice gruff but not unkind, asking if he wanted to be a pro-hero. Izuku replied, his voice firmer than he expected, affirming that he did want to be a hero. 𝗵𝗎𝐸's hand paused on his back for a moment, and he felt her eyes on him, a mixture of concern and pride in her gaze. She continued rubbing his back, encouraging him to keep talking. Aizawa softened his tone, expressing concern for Izuku's well-being. He needed to be sure Izuku was ready for this, mentally and emotionally. Izuku looked up, meeting Aizawa's gaze. He acknowledged that his mental health was still a work in progress, but he believed this was part of his path. He had been through so much, and maybe this was him adapting and finding his way forward. He had never really sought help before, not like this, and maybe his mind was finally responding to that help. Nizu, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up, reminding Izuku that this was a significant decision. They needed to ensure he wasn't rushing into something that might harm him in the long run. Izuku nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had thought about it a lot. Even when he was Nemesis, he wanted to make a difference and achieve something meaningful. He believed he could do that as a hero. He wasn't saying he was suddenly okay or that he didn't need therapy anymore. He still had his issues, his PTSD, and his demons. But he felt this could be his path to healing and becoming who he wanted to be. Nizu smiled at him, a gentle, understanding smile that reached his eyes. He expressed his pride in Izuku, acknowledging the strength it had taken for him to reach this point. Izuku felt warmth in his chest at Nizu's words. Nizu's expression grew serious as he continued, sharing his own story of transformation and the pain he had endured. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared pain that needed no further explanation. Nizu had once despised humans and considered becoming a villain, but after years of reflection, he let go of that hatred. He understood where Izuku was coming from more than he might realize. Izuku was deeply moved by Nizu's story, grateful for the connection they shared. Aizawa broke the silence, concluding the conversation and telling Izuku to go and rest. "You have a big day on Monday." It finally happened. Izuku had won the heart of the R-rated hero. As Aizawa and Nizu left the room, it was just Izuku and Namuri. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his before she leaned in closer, her voice soft and full of affection. She expressed her pride in him, her tone gentle and sincere. Izuku felt a wave of emotion wash over him, grateful for her support. Saying those things out loud had taken a lot out of him. Namuri smiled softly and kissed his forehead, a gesture that was both comforting and reassuring. She encouraged him to take it one step at a time and reminded him that she was there for him. He returned her smile, albeit tired, and thanked her. After a moment, he left the room and made his way to his quarters. Before he could reach his door, he found someone waiting for him, a figure he wasn't expecting. It was All Might, but not in his powerful, heroic form. This was Toshinori Yagi, the man behind the symbol of peace, sitting there in his shrunken, weakened state. Izuku instinctively clenched his fist but then sighed, letting it go. Toshinori asked if he had a minute, his voice almost pleading. Izuku nodded, gesturing for him to enter. Toshinori sat on a chair across from him while Izuku settled onto his bed, the tension in the room palpable. He remarked on Toshinori teaching at UA, his tone even but edged with emotion. Toshinori nodded, his face troubled, and then began to apologize for everything. He expressed his regret for being the hero who failed Izuku, for not saving him, and for the pain he had caused. Izuku looked at him, his eyes cold, anger simmering just below the surface. He bluntly stated that he didn't care about the apologies. He pressed on, questioning why Toshinori had given one for all to his sister, who had made it her mission to belittle him for being quirkless. Toshinori's eyes reflected shock and despair, realizing the depth of Izuku's pain. Izuku interrupted him, his voice low and intense. He pointed out that Toshinori had only seen what he wanted to see, the bright, talented kid who could follow in his footsteps, while ignoring the quirkless boy who was striving to be a hero despite the world's discouragement. Toshinori's head dropped, and Izuku saw him not as the invincible hero but as a broken man who had realized his mistakes too late. Toshinori spoke softly, admitting he had made a terrible mistake. He acknowledged that he had been blinded by his ideals and had failed to see the hero Izuku already was, quirk or no quirk. Izuku let his words linger in the air, unmoved by his regret. He asked what Toshinori wanted now, if he was seeking forgiveness or understanding for his choices. He made it clear that if that was the case, Toshinori was wasting his time. Toshinori shook his head slowly, clarifying that he was not there for forgiveness but to share the truth. He wanted Izuku to know that he recognized his mistakes and understood the pain he had caused. For what it was worth, he was truly sorry but did not expect forgiveness. Izuku searched Toshinori's face for deceit but found only genuine remorse. He expressed uncertainty about what Toshinori wanted from him, his voice quieter now as anger began to fade. He explained that he had made his own choices and had spent years figuring out who he was. Now, he wanted to be himself, not the symbol of peace or the next All Might. Toshinori nodded slowly, sadness filling his eyes. He affirmed that Izuku deserved to be who he truly was, not who anyone else wanted him to be. He offered his support for whatever path Izuku chose, even if it meant stepping aside. Izuku took a moment to absorb Toshinori's words before thanking him softly. He expressed the need for time to figure things out and uncertainty about their relationship moving forward. Toshinori nodded in understanding, assuring Izuku that he would be there whenever he was ready and that he could always come to him, not as All Might but as Toshinori Yagi, someone who cared. Izuku looked at him, seeing the genuine sorrow and regret in his eyes. This was a far cry from the larger-than-life hero he had idolized as a child. This was just a man, flawed and broken, trying to make amends for his past mistakes. Yet those mistakes had cost Izuku dearly. His innocence, his hope, and nearly his life. Forgiveness wasn't something he could easily offer, not after everything he had endured. However, he felt a shift within himself, a fading of the burning anger that had once consumed him. He quietly admitted that he couldn't promise anything. He couldn't promise forgiveness or that things would return to how they once were. But perhaps one day he could let go of the hate and see Toshinori as just Toshinori, not the man who had given up on him. Toshinori accepted his words without argument, expressing gratitude for the chance, however small. Izuku looked away, his eyes drifting to the floor. He acknowledged that he didn't know how long it would take or if he would ever be ready, but he would try. Toshinori gave a small, sad smile as he stood up slowly from the chair, thanking Izuku for this opportunity. Izuku nodded in response, still unable to meet his gaze. Toshinori hesitated for a moment, wanting to say more but ultimately deciding against it. With a final glance, he turned and walked out of her quarters, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. A strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, swirled together in a tangled mess. She didn't know how to process what had just happened. All she knew was that something had changed. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. Eventually, she forced herself to stand up and moved slowly to the window. Perhaps now she could find a new way forward. Maybe she could start to heal, not just for herself, but for the people who still believed in her. For Nomuri, for Aizawa, for Nizu, and maybe one day even for Toshinori. She wasn't there yet, not by a long shot. But she had taken a step, a small, hesitant step toward something better, toward a future that was still uncertain, but no longer completely out of reach. With a deep breath, she turned away from the window and headed to bed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how she would face it. But for now, she could rest. And maybe, just maybe, she could start to dream of a future where she wasn't defined by her past, but by the person she could become. Meanwhile, after Izuku had left Principal Nizu's office, Izumi Midoriya stood quietly in the waiting room at UA High School, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her blazer. She could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced over at Katsuki and Katsumi Bakugo, both of whom were unusually silent. The fiery eyes and confident grins that used to define them were gone. Instead, they looked as unsure and tense as she felt. Shoto and Shiori Todoroki were also present, standing a bit apart, their expressions carefully neutral. The years had not been kind to their group, and the past hung over them like a dark cloud. Izumi turned to Katsumi, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. Katsumi hesitated, searching for the right words. She expressed that she never got the chance to say what she wanted, her voice trailing off as her eyes dropped to the floor. Izumi nodded, understanding what Katsumi was trying to convey. They had all changed, grown up in the shadow of their mistakes. Before any more could be said, the door to the waiting room opened, and Aizawa, known as Eraserhead, stepped in. His face was set in a stern expression, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something that looked like disgust. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual stoic demeanor. He instructed them to follow him in a cold tone, turning sharply and heading down the corridor without waiting for a response. The group exchanged uneasy glances but complied, trailing after Aizawa through the labyrinthine halls of UA. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Finally, they reached the principal's office, and Aizawa pushed open the door, ushering them inside. Principal Nizu was waiting for them behind his desk, his small frame dwarfed by the oversized chair he sat in. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp as they swept over the group. He greeted them politely, but there was a certain edge to his tone that put everyone on alert. No one responded. They just stood there, unsure of what to expect. Nizu continued, addressing them by name and acknowledging their powerful quirks. He noted that such gifts had the potential for harm in the wrong hands. Katsuki's jaw tightened, and he crossed his arms defensively, expressing his annoyance. Nizu didn't flinch at Katsuki's interruption. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes as he mentioned Izuku Midoriya. The room fell into a heavy silence. The mention of Izuku's name felt like a punch to the gut, each of them flinching in their own way as memories rushed back. Memories they had all tried to bury. Nizu watched them carefully, gauging their reactions. He revealed that he had read through all their files and knew the damage they had caused due to their quirk discrimination. He questioned how they could still want to be heroes. Izumi opened her mouth to speak, her voice trembling as she tried to explain their intentions, but 𝗍𝗓 interrupted sharply, insisting he wasn't finished. She fell silent, feeling the weight of her guilt pressing down on her chest. 𝗍𝗓 continued, stating that their actions were not only morally reprehensible but also illegal. He mentioned that Aldra Junior High School had been shut down, some teachers arrested, and many students would not be accepted into any hero schools or normal high schools for a very long time. The group reacted in shock, their eyes widening as they processed the news. 𝗍𝗓 confirmed that this would have been their fate as well, but due to their family connections, quirks, and performance on the entrance tests, they were still allowed to attend UA. Izumi's head was spinning with the overwhelming information. Then, 𝗍𝗓's next words nearly knocked her off her feet. Izuku would be joining them. Katsumi expressed her disbelief, while Izumi whispered in shock, tears welling up in her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment, but hearing it now was almost too much to bear. Shoto's eyes widened in surprise, and even Katsuki seemed momentarily stunned. Shirori and Katsumi were visibly emotional, their expressions a mix of relief and guilt. Shirori asked if Izuku was okay, her voice cracking with emotion. 𝗍𝗓's expression softened slightly as he confirmed that Izuku was alive but had faced extreme mental health challenges and trauma, leaving deep scars. A heavy silence settled over the room as 𝗍𝗓's words sank in. Izumi felt her heart break at the thought of what her brother had endured, what they had all put him through. 𝗍𝗓 warned them that there would be consequences if any of them stepped out of line. UA would not tolerate any behavior that jeopardized the safety or well-being of its students. Katsuki muttered about consequences, his brows furrowing, and 𝗍𝗓 replied sharply that they would be on probation. Any misconduct or signs of their previous behavior would result in expulsion, permanently barring them from any other hero school in the country. Izumi felt the color drain from her face as she realized the seriousness of their situation. It was more serious than anything they had ever faced before. She quietly acknowledged their wrongdoing, questioning if the punishment was too harsh. 𝗍𝗓 responded, pointing out that compared to what Izuku had endured, this was lenient. Tears spilled down Izumi's cheeks, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The others shared her devastation, their expressions a mix of shame and fear. Shirori expressed their regret, admitting they never intended for things to go this way. 𝗍𝗓 acknowledged their remorse but reminded them that what was done, and they had to live with the consequences. Izumi wiped her eyes, feeling heavy with guilt. She had wanted to protect Izuku, to be a hero, but instead, she had become the villain in his story. Katsumi reached out, brushing her arm gently, promising they would make things right somehow. Izumi nodded, unable to voice her thoughts, but she knew they had to try for Izuku's sake and their own. 𝗍𝗓 observed them for a moment before suggesting they start thinking about their actions. They would soon meet Izuku, and he expected them to treat him with the respect he deserved. They all nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As they left the office, Izumi felt a mix of dread and hope, dread for the confrontation with her brother and hope that they could find a way to make amends. Standing in front of the mirror, Izuku adjusted the collar of his UA male school uniform. It fit him well, though he wasn't used to seeing himself in such attire, a clean white shirt, a blazer adorned with the school's logo, green briefs, and a neatly hanging red tie. It felt surreal, like trying on someone else's dream, a dream he had once held when life was simpler. But now, everything was different. He sighed, looking at his reflection, the dark circles under his eyes refusing to be concealed. 4 years of running, surviving, and changing had taken their toll since he had vanished from their lives. Nemuri's voice broke through his thoughts, asking if he was okay as she stepped closer, adjusting his collar and tie with a comforting touch. Her caring eyes searched his. He nodded, though anxiety twisted in his chest. He acknowledged the significance of being at UA, a place he had always dreamed of attending. Nemuri chuckled softly, remarking on how life worked in unexpected ways. She reminded him that he had earned his place there, despite the rough journey. Izuku struggled to contain the overwhelming emotions rising within him. He had longed for this moment, but not under these circumstances. When 𝗵𝗲 asked if he was happy, he managed a small, faint smile. Her face brightened, and she complimented his smile. She leaned in, sharing a gentle kiss that felt new yet familiar. It was a love he thought he had lost forever, but 𝗵𝗲 had given it to him freely. He accepted it, though he felt unworthy. She then urged him to be careful, her voice serious. He understood her concern. Today he would face his sister, Izumi, and those who had once been his friends. He couldn't avoid them forever. He reassured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. 𝗵𝗲 wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, her warmth overwhelming in the best way. For a brief moment, he melted into her embrace, feeling loved and cared for, a dream he hoped would last. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped back, taking a deep breath. It was time to face the day. As Izuku walked through the corridors of 𝐬𝐽, the weight of his past pressed heavily on his shoulders. His steps were slow and deliberate as he approached the classroom, anxiety swirling in his chest. He had faced much worse, but seeing them again after so long was a different challenge. He opened the door and stepped inside, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. There, sitting with her feet propped on the desk, was Katsuki. Across from her sat Katsumi, both of them full of attitude. Tenya Ida stood tall, demanding Katsuki to remove her feet from the desk, emphasizing the disrespect it showed to the school and those who came before them. Katsumi shot back, her fiery temper flaring, though her voice faltered slightly when she saw Izuku. The room seemed to freeze as their gazes locked. 4 years had passed since they last saw him. Katsumi's shock was evident, while Katsuki's hardened expression softened, revealing a hint of guilt. Izuku clenched his fists, memories flooding his mind, painful reminders of bullying and taunts that surrounded them. Rage, sorrow, and fear mixed within him as he faced the familiar faces of Katsuki, Katsumi, Izumi, Shoto, and Shirori. Their presence stirred a whirlwind of emotions. Katsuki broke the silence, her voice softer and uncertain, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. His once bright green hair now appeared darker, nearly black, and faint scars marked his fingers, remnants of the hardships he had endured. The dark circles under his eyes told a story of sleepless nights and battles fought alone. Izumi stood in the back, her eyes wide, struggling to keep herself composed. Beside her, Shoto and Shirori remained silent, though their eyes revealed their surprise. Izuku glanced at them briefly before lowering his gaze, unwilling to acknowledge their presence after everything that had transpired. Tenya Ida broke the tension, standing directly in front of Izuku. He introduced himself as a student from 𝗬𝗵𝗲 Academy and inquired about Izuku's name. Izuku blinked, a little taken aback by the boy's willingness to speak to him. There was something about Ida's posture that made Izuku uncertain whether to trust him or be suspicious. He finally responded quietly, stating that he was Izuku and did not have a surname. Izumi, standing not far away, bit her lip as tears welled in her eyes. Her little brother, the one she had once cherished, was before her, refusing to acknowledge their shared name. The pain was almost unbearable, but she quickly wiped her tears away before anyone noticed. Ida continued, expressing curiosity about Izuku's absence during the entrance exams and asking if he had participated in the special recommendation tests. Izuku shook his head slightly, explaining that he had been recommended by the Public Safety Commission. Ida responded with evident admiration, suggesting that Izuku must be very strong. Izuku shrugged, not wanting to continue the conversation. Just then, the room turned toward the figure standing at the door. It was Shota Aizawa, dressed in his usual disheveled attire, his tired eyes scanning the room. He introduced himself as the hero known as Eraserhead and stated that he would be their homeroom teacher. The class remained silent, the tension thick in the air. Aizawa informed them that they would be doing some exercises and instructed them to head to the locker room and come to the field wearing their gym uniforms. With that, the first day at UA officially began. As Izuku stood in the locker room, staring at the gym uniform in his hands, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. The uniform was simple, just as he had imagined it would be. It was dark blue, almost navy, with white stripes running down the sides and arms, forming a sharp U shape on the chest that represented UA. It was functional, designed for maximum flexibility and endurance. Wearing it now felt surreal, as if he were stepping into a world he once thought impossible to reach. But this was no dream. He was actually here, standing in a place he had once longed to be. Yet, it felt different now, devoid of the excitement and joy he had once felt. That dream had faded long ago, but here he was, forced to live it anyway. As he began to change into the uniform, a voice behind him caught his attention. A guy with spiky red hair smiled wide, his sharp teeth glinting in the light, giving him a beastly appearance, yet there was an undeniable friendliness in his demeanor. He introduced himself as Kirishima, but his expression shifted to one of shock as his eyes widened. All the boys in the locker room turned to look at him, confusion on their faces, but their expressions quickly changed as they noticed Izuku. Their eyes widened further as they took in his physique. Years of training had sculpted his body, lean and defined, but it was the scars that drew their astonishment. His skin bore the marks of past struggles, long jagged lines running across his midsection, arms, back, and legs, each one a testament to pain and survival. Kirishima, breaking the heavy silence, stammered, expressing concern for Izuku's well-being. Izuku turned his gaze toward him, sensing the genuine concern but not in the mood to recount his past. He offered the simplest explanation he could, stating that he had an accident with his quirk and urged Kirishima not to worry about it. Just then, a voice he hadn't heard in years made his blood run cold. Katsuki Bakugo stood frozen, staring at him, his face a mix of horror and disbelief as he took in the scars. Izuku could see the gears turning in Bakugo's mind, the confusion and fear evident in his eyes. The last time they had seen each other, Izuku was a quirkless kid, a nobody clinging to dreams that seemed out of reach. Now, the sight of him must have shattered whatever image Bakugo had of the Deku he once knew. Izuku's voice was low and filled with venom as he warned Bakugo not to call him Deku. The locker room fell silent, the tension palpable. The boys who had been staring at his scars shifted uncomfortably, sensing the rising intensity. Izuku stepped toward Bakugo, letting the weight of his presence fill the space between them. He could see Bakugo tense, sweat forming on his forehead, and for the first time, he sensed fear in Bakugo's demeanor. Bakugo muttered in disbelief, questioning why he felt scared of Izuku. The irony of the situation was not lost on Izuku. The boy who had bullied him for years now stood before him trembling. Before Bakugo could say anything further, 𝗕𝗓𝐻 stepped between them, attempting to diffuse the escalating tension. His presence was as commanding as ever as he raised his hands to separate the two of them, his voice filled with authority. Ida spoke calmly yet firmly, urging both of them to settle down. He reminded them that it was only the first day and suggested they proceed to the field as instructed by their teacher. Given the tension between them, it was evident they had a history, but this was neither the time nor the place for past grievances to resurface. Izuku stared at Ida for a moment, appreciating his level-headedness and diplomatic approach, trying to maintain peace. However, there was no peace to be found between him and Bakugo. That had been the case for a long time. With a sigh, he relented and took a step back, aware that the others were watching, anticipating a confrontation. But he was not there to start a fight. Not yet. He had a purpose, and he wouldn't let Bakugo or anyone else derail that. Before walking away, he leaned in close to Bakugo, his voice barely above a whisper so only he could hear. He hoped Bakugo understood the weight of his words, warning him that he was no longer the same Izuku who had been bullied. He cautioned Bakugo to tread carefully, suggesting that he should be mindful of his actions, as the stakes were high for everyone involved. After leaving the locker room, the tension in the field was palpable. It was the first day of training at UA, and everything felt significant. Aizawa-sensei stood before them, his tired eyes scanning the group as if assessing each student. He began by stating that time was of the essence in the world of heroism, emphasizing that even a mere 10 minutes could mean the difference between saving a life or losing one. Izuku understood this all too well. He had witnessed the harsh realities of delayed heroism. The world was not as kind as many believed, not to him or anyone else. Next to him stood a girl with short auburn hair, her bright eyes full of life, contrasting sharply with his own feelings of unease. She greeted him cheerfully, introducing herself as Ochiko Uraraka. Her genuine nature caught him off guard, and he found it difficult to respond to her kindness, which felt foreign to him. When she remarked that he resembled someone named Izumi, his heart skipped a beat. Izumi was his twin, sharing the same features but living a different life. He felt the weight of the stares from others nearby, waiting for his response. Not wanting to deal with their questions or judgments, he lied, stating they were not related and revealing that he was an orphan. Regret flashed across Ochiko's face, and she quickly apologized for her inquiry, her concern evident. Izuku felt a mix of guilt and irritation. He hadn't wanted to make her feel bad. He dismissed her apology and turned his focus back to Aizawa, who clapped his hands to regain their attention. He announced they would start with a simple exercise and singled Izuku out, tossing him a ball. As Izuku caught the ball, murmurs rippled through the students. He could feel their curiosity, especially from Katsumi, who was watching him intently, her fists clenched as if waiting to see if the rumors about his quirk were true. Standing in the circle, he looked up at Aizawa, gripping the ball tightly. Aizawa instructed him to throw the ball as hard as he could using his quirk. Izuku glanced at the bracelet on his wrist, which regulated his power, ensuring he didn't exceed the limits set for him. He had never attempted to push it to its maximum at such a low output, but now seemed like the perfect opportunity. Determined, he clenched his fist, feeling the familiar surge of energy coursing through him. Dark green energy swirled around his hand, glowing brighter until it enveloped the ball. The energy pulsed beneath his skin, a powerful force that he had to control. As he prepared to launch the ball, it glowed intensely, surrounded by a deep green aura. When he released it, the sound was deafening, and a shockwave erupted from his hand, sending the ball soaring into the air. It shot forward with incredible speed, leaving a trail of green energy behind as it tore through the sky. The air shimmered around it, vibrating with the force of the throw, and the ball disappeared from view almost instantly. The students stood frozen, watching the glowing streak vanish into the horizon. Aizawa checked his phone, his expression neutral as he read the score. He announced the distance, revealing it to be an impressive 1,270 meters, hinting that even he was somewhat impressed by the feat. A stunned silence followed, quickly replaced by whispers among the students, who were clearly astonished by what they had just witnessed. Comments of disbelief filled the air, with one boy exclaiming how effortlessly Izuku had launched the ball. Another, with blonde hair and a streak of lightning, remarked on how cool it was, still staring at the spot where the ball had disappeared. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the comment, surprised by the admiration. He hadn't aimed to impress anyone, but the reaction from his peers was undeniable. His voice cut through the chatter, drawing everyone's attention back to him. Aizawa paused for effect, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the class. He informed them that whoever came in last during the test would be expelled. An immediate uproar followed, with students expressing their disbelief and concern about the unfairness of the situation. Aizawa remained indifferent, stating that life isn't fair and that he had expelled entire classes on their first day before. He warned them that they had 8 tests ahead, and if they performed poorly, they would be saying goodbye to their future as heroes. Stunned for a moment like the rest of them, the initial shock wore off, and the protagonist shrugged it off. They weren't there to make friends or prove themselves. They were there for one reason alone. Failure wasn't an option. As they made their way back to the group, Uraraka stood waiting, her eyes wide with amazement, her earlier cheerfulness replaced with awe. She expressed her excitement about the energy display and asked about the protagonist's quirk. The protagonist hesitated, amused to such genuine curiosity. They explained that they could generate energy inside their body to enhance their physical abilities, demonstrating with a glowing orb that left those nearby stunned. As they walked past Izumi, tension hung in the air. She caught their eye for just a second, her gaze pleading, but they didn't hesitate. Leaning in close so that no one else could hear, they made it clear that they were not siblings and warned her not to share their real relationship with anyone. Izumi's eyes widened, and she attempted to apologize, but the protagonist cut her off, their voice cold and firm. Before they could turn away, Katsumi grabbed their hand, her grip tight and desperate. She demanded an explanation, expressing concern for their absence and questioning how they had developed a quirk. The protagonist yanked their hand free, their face twisting into a sneer as they reminded Katsumi to stay away from them. Shock and disbelief flickered in her eyes. Before Katsumi could respond, Shiori approached with concern, pleading to talk and understand what was happening. The protagonist clenched their fists, feeling rage bubbling beneath the surface as their quirk reacted to the tension. They warned Shiori to leave, their voice low and dangerously calm. Just as they felt they might lose control, they sensed Aizawa neutralizing their quirk, the energy within them starting to fade. A quick glance at Aizawa revealed a neutral expression, but his eyes conveyed a message: to calm down. Before anyone could speak further, Shoto appeared, his voice calm and steady, instructing Shiori to stop and indicating they would deal with the situation later. Katsuki stepped beside his sister, echoing Shoto's sentiment and pulling Katsumi back. With that, the moment passed and the weight of their stares lingered, but the protagonists didn't care. They knew they wouldn't be understood. They moved on to the tests, Aizawa leading the way as they began the 8 challenges. With each test, the tension in the air grew stronger, but the protagonist kept their focus, determined to show that they weren't weak anymore. The first test was a 50-meter dash. Aizawa explained the rules, and they all lined up, ready to go. Standing at the starting line, the protagonist glanced at their classmates, aware that they were being watched. When the whistle blew, they didn't hold back. Using a portion of their energy to enhance their speed, they tore across the track, moving like lightning. Within seconds, they crossed the finish line well ahead of the others. Aizawa announced their first-place finish, noting the impressive time. The other students murmured in surprise, with Katsumi narrowing her eyes but saying nothing. The second test was grip strength. Each student took turns squeezing the grip tester, and when it was the protagonist's turn, they felt the familiar hum of energy building in their arms. They squeezed the device carefully, and the numbers shot up rapidly. Aizawa announced their first-place finish again, seemingly bored, and the astonished reactions from their classmates filled the air. Kirishima expressed his amazement at the incredible grip strength displayed by one of their peers, while Siro shook his head in admiration, wondering about the training that could lead to such abilities. As I stepped aside to let others take their turns, I felt that the challenges were becoming easier for me. The third test involved a standing long jump. I propelled myself into the air, soaring past my classmates and landing well beyond the marked area. Aizawa announced my first-place finish, noting my impressive distance of 12.6 meters. I sensed the attention on me, but winning was my primary focus. Kaminari commented on my performance, clearly impressed, while Jiro questioned the nature of my quirk, noting that I had yet to explain my abilities despite the display of power. The fourth test was a series of repeated side steps. Although it wasn't particularly challenging, I pushed myself, completing more steps than anyone else. Aizawa confirmed my first-place finish once again, and the murmurs of my classmates grew louder, but I remained unfazed. The fifth test was the ball throw, which I had already completed earlier, and Aizawa simply reiterated my previous result, stating that I had broken the machine. Mina gasped in disbelief, while Siro and Kaminari shared their astonishment at my performance. During the sixth test, sit-ups, I initially struggled to keep pace but eventually surged ahead, finishing with the highest count. Aizawa once again declared me the winner. The seventh test involved seated toe touches, where my flexibility allowed me to secure another first-place finish. Finally, the eighth test was the endurance run. I started at a steady pace, allowing my classmates to tire themselves out, before sprinting ahead and crossing the finish line well in front of the others. Aizawa announced my victory one last time. As the test concluded, the top 3 results were displayed. I was in first place, followed by Shoto in second and Katsuki in third. My classmates looked at me with a mix of awe and disbelief. Siro whispered to Kirishima, questioning how I had achieved such results, while Kirishima acknowledged the extraordinary nature of my ball throw. Katsumi appeared frustrated, her gaze fixed on me, while Katsuki remained silent. Izumi seemed eager to approach me, and Shoto maintained a neutral expression, though I sensed he was analyzing my every move. Aizawa's tone shifted to a more serious note as he informed the class that one of them would be going home that day. The atmosphere grew tense as he scanned the room. He then revealed that Mineta, who had ranked last in every test, would be the one leaving. Mineta's panic was palpable as he pleaded for a chance to prove himself. I felt a twinge of sympathy for him, despite the strange vibes he gave off. Aizawa, however, remained unfazed by Mineta's distress and revealed that it had all been a ruse to motivate everyone. Mineta collapsed in relief, grateful that he would not be going home. With the test concluded, Aizawa dismissed us back to class. As I walked alongside Ochako, I noticed her bright smile and the admiration in her eyes. She complimented my strength and suggested I should be in a higher class. Her words caught me off guard, and I felt a bit embarrassed as I explained that everyone has their own strengths and that I still had room for improvement. Ochako blinked in surprise at my response, calling me wise and expressing her appreciation for our budding friendship. The mention of friendship resonated with me, feeling warm and comforting. However, her flustered reaction when she accidentally called me cute made us both blush. As we continued to walk, the atmosphere lightened, and we entered the classroom where chatter resumed. Ida stood up formally, introducing himself and his quirk, which was related to engines. The rest of the class followed suit, sharing their names and abilities. Kaminari introduced himself next, explaining his quirk of electrification, which allowed him to shoot electricity but came with the risk of short-circuiting his brain if overused. Izumi then shared her quirk, Shockwave, expressing her ambition to become the greatest hero. When it was my turn, I reiterated my name and quirk, energy generation and manipulation. Mina bounced forward, full of energy, and introduced herself as well, revealing her quirk, acid, which allowed her to produce and control a corrosive liquid. Kirishima stepped up confidently, giving everyone a thumbs up. He introduced himself as Eijiro Kirishima, stating that his quirk was hardening, which made his body super tough. He proclaimed it to be manly. Tsuyu Azui followed, calmly introducing herself as Tsuyu and explaining her quirk, frog, which allowed her to perform various frog-like abilities. Next was Tokoyami, who introduced himself as 𝗵𝗵𝗃 Tokoyami. He explained that his quirk, Dark Shadow, enabled him to control a sentient shadow that grew stronger in darkness but weakened in light. Mina, with a grin, found it a bit scary, to which Tokoyami shrugged, saying it was only a concern if he lost control. Siro waved casually, introducing himself as Hanta Siro, whose quirk, Tape, allowed him to shoot tape from his elbows, making him a practical asset for capturing villains. Jiro smirked as she introduced herself as Kyoka Jiro, explaining her quirk, Earphone Jack, which allowed her to plug her earphone jacks into objects and channel sound waves through them, useful for both attacking and scouting. Katsumi, who had been quiet, finally spoke up as Katsumi Bakugo, declaring her quirk, Flame Ignition, which allowed her to make things burst into flames. She confidently stated that she was the strongest, urging others not to compete with her. Katsuki Bakugo followed, introducing himself as Katsuki Bakugo, whose quirk was Explosion. He claimed he intended to be the real strongest and the #1 hero. Ochako Uraraka jumped in next, introducing herself and explaining her quirk, Zero Gravity, which allowed her to make things float by touching them, though it made her nauseous if overused. She laughed, rubbing the back of her neck. Shoto Todoroki stood coolly, introducing himself and explaining his quirk, Half Cold, Half Hot, which allowed him to create ice with his right side and fire with his left. Shirori Todoroki followed, introducing herself as Shirori and stating her quirk was Frost Fire, which was evident from its name. Momo Yaoyorozu stepped forward confidently, introducing herself and explaining her quirk, Creation, which allowed her to create any non-living object from her body as long as she understood its molecular structure. She paused, looking directly at Izuku, stating that it was obvious he was probably the strongest student for now and expressing hope for their development together as rivals. Momo extended her hand for a handshake, and Izuku hesitated for a moment before shaking it, trying to play it cool despite feeling the weight of multiple gazes on him. After Momo's introduction, the remaining students stepped up one by one. Koji Koda timidly approached, introducing himself and explaining his quirk, Ani Voice, which allowed him to communicate with animals. He waved before retreating back to his seat, clearly uncomfortable. 𝗵𝗲 𝗠𝗍𝗂𝐷 stood up next, introducing himself and explaining his quirk, 𝗬𝗠𝗍𝗄 arms, which allowed him to replicate parts of his body through tentacles. 𝗓𝗏𝗄 𝗧𝗏𝗄 followed, cheerfully introducing himself and explaining his quirk, sugar rush, which increased his strength by consuming sugar, though overdoing it made him sleepy. 𝗂𝐬𝐽𝐫 followed with dramatic flair, introducing himself and explaining his quirk, naval laser, which allowed him to shoot a laser from his belly button, though it caused him discomfort if overused. Toru Hagekure's introduction was a bit strange since she was invisible. She waved her invisible hand and introduced herself, explaining her quirk, invisibility, which made her invisible all the time. Minoru Mineta finally regained his composure after the earlier scare, nervously introducing himself and explaining his quirk, pop-off, which allowed him to pull sticky ball from his head to trap people or stick to surfaces, though using too many caused him to bleed from his scalp. The introductions continued, but Izuku found it hard to focus, his thoughts drifting back to Momo's words about being rivals and the strongest. He didn't want that kind of attention. He just wanted to stay in the background and survive. But this was UA, and there was no staying in the background here. As the class settled down, Izuku felt a creeping unease. He glanced at Ochako, who gave him a thumbs up and a smile, making him feel slightly better. However, he wasn't used to the expectations from so many people. As he sat back in his seat, he thought about how much harder this year would be than he anticipated. When everyone began to leave the classroom, Ochako turned back and waved with her cheerful smile, saying she would see him later. Izuku smiled back, feeling a bit lighter. Kaminari and Shiro approached, looking relaxed and giving him friendly smiles. They exchanged casual farewells before leaving together, laughing. However, that feeling of peace didn't last long. As soon as Izuku turned around, he found himself face to face with Izumi, Katsumi, Katsuki, Shoto, and Shiori, all blocking his exit. He felt his body tense up, gripping his backpack strap as he glared at them. He asked what they wanted, not bothering to hide the disdain in his voice. He was done pretending and playing nice with those who had made his life difficult for years. Katsumi, standing at the front, crossed her arms and stared at him with frustration, demanding an explanation. Izuku scoffed at the unexpected question. Katsuki stepped forward, anger radiating from him. He demanded to know what had happened to Izuku and why he was suddenly so strong. Izumi turned sharply toward Katsuki, her voice sharp as she tried to defuse the situation. She insisted that Katsuki let Izuku speak. However, Izumi wasn't finished. She turned to Izuku, her eyes filled with guilt, and expressed that they should be apologizing for everything that had caused him to run away. She promised they weren't there to manipulate him. Shoto sighed heavily, as if the entire situation was exhausting for him, and nodded in agreement with Izumi. He stated that they weren't there to pick a fight. Katsumi interjected, her voice more frustrated than before, reminding Izuku that it had been 4 years and questioning whether he had thought about them or his family during that time. This struck a nerve, and Izuku's anger boiled over. He told them to be quiet, his voice laced with venom, surprising them all. As he stepped forward, the words he had kept bottled up for years began to pour out. He recounted how, ever since he had come out as quirkless, they had made him their target practice, their punching bag. They had torn him down, ensuring he knew his place and felt worthless. He pointed directly at Izumi, his twin sister, the one person he thought would always support him. Her face paled as his words hit her hard. Izuku continued, expressing that if the others had treated him poorly, he could have handled it. Friends might not last forever, and he could have moved on. But Izumi was supposed to be his sister, his twin, the one who had promised to protect him. Instead, she had joined the others in tearing him down. The memories weighed heavily on him, and he asked if she remembered what she had said to him, recalling a moment when she had cruelly suggested he should take a leap off the roof if he wanted a quirk so badly. His voice was raw with emotion as he spoke, reopening old wounds. Izumi's face crumbled, tears filling her eyes, but Izuku felt no sympathy. He revealed that he had almost taken his own life because of her words, questioning if she understood the pain that had caused him. Katsumi looked away, unable to meet his gaze, while Shoto's face reflected stoic regret. Even Katsuki, usually the loudest, had nothing to say. Izuku's voice softened but remained intense as he explained that he hadn't left because he wanted to. He had left because he had no choice. He would have died if he stayed, and none of them had cared. The silence that followed was suffocating, filled with guilt and regret. Before anyone could respond, the classroom door slid open, and Aizawa-sensei entered, his expression stern and cold. He demanded to know what was happening, silencing Izumi when she tried to speak. Aizawa reminded them that they were supposed to limit their interactions with Izuku and noted that they seemed unable to follow simple instructions. Katsuki gritted his teeth, ready to retort, but Aizawa cut him off, warning them that if they didn't want to get expelled, they should leave immediately. The weight of his words hit them all at once. Shoto nodded first and began to walk out, followed by Shiori. Katsumi hesitated, her eyes lingering on Izuku, but she quickly turned and left. Izumi looked as if she wanted to say something, but Aizawa's glare kept her silent as she exited without another word. Izuku remained, still seething with anger as the door closed behind them. Aizawa gave him a long, hard look before speaking, acknowledging that Izuku had handled the situation better than he expected. He advised Izuku to come to him before things escalated again. Izuku nodded, still trying to calm himself. Aizawa added that they weren't worth his time before turning and leaving the room, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he felt he had finally expressed what he needed to say. However, the wounds were still there, and he knew it would take a long time for them to heal. But for now, he had said his piece. Meanwhile, Izumi walked into her house, greeted by the familiar sight of her mother, 𝗃𝐻 Midoriya. Once known as the former hero 𝗕𝗏𝗏, 𝗃𝐻 had become a stay-at-home mom, her figure now reflecting years of stress and sadness from losing her son. 𝗃𝐻 looked up from the couch as Izumi entered, her face brightening momentarily with a forced smile. She asked how Izumi's first day at school had gone, her voice filled with hope. Izumi wanted to say it had been amazing, to make her mother feel better, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't bring herself to lie, especially about this. Her thoughts drifted to All Might, wondering if he had known about Izuku. She had noticed lately that he barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was short and dismissive. He no longer trained her like he used to and had even suggested she didn't deserve one for all. Determined, Izumi stated that she needed to talk to her father immediately and insisted that 𝗃𝐻 hear what he had to say. Before 𝗃𝐻 could respond, Hisashi Midoriya, the legendary hero Inferno, walked into the room, his face lighting up at the sight of his daughter. He greeted her warmly, asking about her first day. But Izumi wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. She cut straight to the point, her face set in a frown, and asked if he knew that Izuku was going to UA or that he hadn't been missing all this time. Hisashi's smile vanished instantly, replaced by shock. Before he could respond, 𝗃𝐻 shot up from the couch, her eyes wide with panic. She exclaimed that she needed to know if Izuku was alive. Izumi clenched her fists, frustration mounting as she recalled Principal Nisa's warning when he invited them to UA just days before school started. She demanded to know if their father had known about Izuku's survival. Hisashi's expression fell, and he sighed deeply, admitting that he had known. 𝗃𝐻's eyes filled with tears as she took a shaky step forward, her voice breaking. She struggled to comprehend that her little Izuku was alive and that Hisashi had kept it from her. Hisashi rubbed the back of his neck, guilt evident on his face. He explained that he had made the decision to protect her, recalling how she had nearly taken her own life after Izuku's disappearance. He couldn't risk putting her through that pain again. Izumi interjected, her voice wavering as she expressed her concern that Izuku was different now. He no longer spoke to her and seemed to harbor resentment towards them all, even their mother. 𝗃𝐻's hands flew to her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes as she sank back onto the couch, devastated by the thought that her son might hate her. Hisashi stepped forward, shoulders slumping in defeat. He revealed that Izuku had endured something horrific, something he couldn't fully explain. He was not the same boy they remembered. He had changed. Izumi's voice grew firmer as she shared her own struggles, noting that even All Might barely spoke to her now, likely due to Izuku's situation. Hisashi looked at her with tired eyes, acknowledging the heavy burden she carried. He reminded her that they all had failed Izuku in some way, including himself as a father and 𝗏𝗏 as a mother. 𝗏𝗏 looked up at 𝐬𝐵, desperation etched on her tear-streaked face. She pleaded for a chance to fix things, to help Izuku. 𝐬𝐵's expression darkened as he admitted uncertainty about whether they could truly make things right. Izuku was no longer the boy who smiled at them. He was a different person, filled with anger and pain, and it was unclear if he would ever forgive them. The room fell into a heavy silence. 𝗏𝗏 buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly, while Izumi stood with clenched fists, guilt weighing heavily on her. 𝐬𝐵, once a proud hero, now felt broken, unable to mend the shattered family. Finally, Izumi spoke softly, expressing her need to apologize to Izuku for everything she had done. 𝐬𝐵 shook his head sadly, warning her that an apology might not be enough. Izuku had been through more than they could imagine, and she needed to be prepared for the possibility of rejection. Izumi swallowed hard, her heart aching at the thought, but she nodded slowly, determined to try. 𝐬𝐵 looked at her with a mix of pride and sorrow, encouraging her to seek out Izuku but cautioning her not to expect an easy reconciliation. 𝗏𝗏, her voice shaking, asked if she could see him and talk to him. 𝐬𝐵 sighed, unsure if it was a good idea, given Izuku's anger. 𝗏𝗏 nodded, clearly heartbroken, missing her son deeply. 𝐬𝐵 acknowledged that they all missed him, but they needed to give Izuku space to heal in his own time. The silence in the room was deafening as the weight of their broken family settled in. Izumi clenched her fists again, her resolve strengthening. She didn't know if Izuku would ever forgive her, but she had to try. She owed him that much. As Izuku walked into his room, he was surprised to find something new on his desk, a brand new mobile phone and a laptop. The sleek Samsung Galaxy S23 gleamed in the dim light, and the high-end Asus ROG Zephyrus laptop powered up without issue, both appearing fresh out of the box. Before he could ponder this, a familiar voice behind him sent a pleasant shiver down his spine. Namuri Kayama, known as Midnight, leaned against the doorframe with a teasing smile. His face turned red as he met her gaze. She playfully called him her little cinnamon roll, and despite his embarrassment, he felt warmth at her affection. When she leaned in and kissed him softly, he melted into the moment, feeling his worries dissipate. After pulling away, she brushed her fingers through his messy green hair and asked about his first day at school, her tone a mix of teasing and genuine curiosity. He scratched the back of his head, still flustered, and mentioned that he thought he had made some friends, including a guy named Ida. He seemed really serious, almost intimidating at first, but it was clear he meant well. Achiko was super friendly and a bit clumsy in an endearing way. Kirishima was easy to talk to, embodying manliness and straightforwardness. Namuri smiled at me, her eyes softening, and expressed her pride in my efforts to put myself out there. However, my expression darkened slightly as I recalled some old acquaintances I had encountered. Her smile faded, replaced by concern. She pulled me into a tighter hug, wrapping her arms around me protectively. In her embrace, I felt safe, as if nothing from my past could hurt me anymore. She whispered comforting words, stroking my hair gently, and mentioned that Aizawa had told her I handled the situation better than expected. I buried my face in her shoulder for a moment, feeling the weight of my goal. I resolved not to let my past or people like them stand in my way any longer. Namuri looked at me with pride, reminding me that I didn't let the bad experiences define who I was. Her words eased some of the tension I had been feeling, but my curiosity about the new gadgets on my desk grew. I gestured toward the phone and laptop, raising an eyebrow in question. She grinned sheepishly, explaining that since I mostly slept and read books, I needed some modern conveniences to relax a bit. After discussing it with Nizu, they agreed I should have access to these items. However, I narrowed my eyes slightly, sensing a catch. She chuckled softly, leaning against the desk casually as she explained the limitations. Both the phone and laptop were monitored for safety, with pre-approved contacts and tracked messages. The internet access was restricted, blocking certain sites that might be a bad influence. Processing her words, I realized I could use the internet and play games, but everything was being watched. She reassured me that it was just a precaution for my safety, especially after everything I had been through. I sighed, understanding the need for caution but still feeling a bit restricted. 𝗵𝗲 tilted her head, offering a sympathetic look, and encouraged me to call her if I ever got bored. She stepped closer, giving my hand a gentle squeeze and reminding me that I wasn't alone. I nodded slowly, feeling warmth in my heart at her words. I appreciated her support. She smiled softly, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to my forehead and suggested I relax and test out the new laptop. I chuckled, shaking my head, skeptical that a game could fix my problems. She smirked, suggesting it was a start. Looking at the laptop again, I reflected on how overwhelming my first day at UA had been. Meeting new people and facing my past was a lot to take in, but I was grateful for the support I had from people like 𝗵𝗲. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. The next day at school, 𝗂𝗃𝗄 and I were chatting as usual. Class 1A had settled into their roles, becoming more comfortable with the rhythm of our classes. Lunchtime arrived, and I was enjoying a cheese steak sandwich, something I had grown to like a lot recently. I had never thought much about food before, but I couldn't deny I enjoyed the taste. As I chewed my sandwich, I marveled at how strange it was to have friends now. It felt completely different from my past experiences with Katsuki, Katsumi, Shoto, or Shirori. Things felt lighter, less hostile, and people didn't sneer or shout at me like before. 𝗂𝗃𝗄 interrupted my thoughts, wondering what we would have for the next class since lunch was almost over. I replied plainly that it was hero training, swallowing the last bite of my sandwich. I didn't have much energy for an excited response, but 𝗂𝗃𝗄 seemed pleased. Tsuyu, sitting next to 𝗂𝗃𝗄, chimed in, wondering who would teach the class. Mina added with excitement that it was going to be awesome, practically bouncing in her seat. Her energy was infectious, but I couldn't match it. I glanced around and noticed something odd. I was suddenly surrounded by girls. 𝗂𝗃𝗄, Tsuyu, Mina, and even Momo were all close, making the cafeteria feel even smaller. I thought to myself that as long as I wasn't forced to talk too much, I was fine with it. Inwardly, I had a good idea of what was coming next. It was probably going to be All Might, the most suited for teaching combat, despite our complicated relationship. The feeling lingered that it would be like old times, back when he was my favorite hero. Before he crushed my dreams, before he entrusted one for all to his sister, and before the facility where I received my quirk, one above all, turned my life into a living nightmare. Kirishima, sitting across from me, leaned forward with his usual enthusiasm. He expressed his excitement for hero training, wondering what it would entail. I cynically imagined that if it was All Might, it would likely involve combat, noting that it seemed to be the only thing he excelled at. Kirishima blinked, slightly taken aback by my response, but he simply grinned, insisting that even if it was just combat, it would be awesome. Despite not being close to All Might anymore, I had to admit he was still the #1 hero for a reason. No one could deny his power, not even me. Before I could dwell on it further, a voice echoed through the cafeteria announcing that lunch break was over and to return to classes. Everyone stood up, grabbing their trays and heading for the door. I followed behind, my mind still preoccupied with what was to come. A few minutes later, we were all seated in class, the room buzzing with excitement as we awaited our instructor's arrival. Then, in typical fashion, the door flew open dramatically. All Might announced his arrival with his signature flair, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the over-the-top entrance. The class erupted in excitement, with students shouting their admiration for All Might, thrilled that he was their teacher. For most of them, this was a dream come true. The symbol of peace teaching at UA was a thrilling prospect, but for me, the excitement was absent. I had seen too much behind the mask. All Might strode confidently to the front of the classroom, standing tall as ever. He announced that he would be teaching basic hero training, specifically focusing on battle training. The class erupted in cheers, everyone talking at once about the upcoming training. Kaminari couldn't contain his excitement, practically bouncing in his seat, while Siro wondered about the fight scenarios we would encounter. Kirishima grinned, his fists clenched with determination, declaring it would be the most manly experience. While everyone was hyped, I felt like an outsider. The fact that I was even allowed to participate felt like cheating. I had the quirk one above all and had already bested elite heroes during my nemesis phase. Now, here I was sitting among a group of novice heroes. I needed to talk to Nizu about this. It didn't seem right, even if I was trying to live a normal life now. Mina's voice snapped me out of my thoughts, and I blinked, realizing I had zoned out. She looked at me with concern, asking if I was okay. I awkwardly scratched the back of my head and offered a small, sheepish smile, apologizing for zoning out. She smiled back, but her eyes lingered on me, as if trying to understand what was going on in my head. I quickly looked away. All Might's booming voice interrupted the chatter, commanding attention. He declared that no hero training would be complete without our costumes. At his command, the walls of the classroom opened, revealing 20 suitcases neatly lined up. Each one had a seat number engraved on it. All Might instructed us to grab a suitcase with our seat number and get changed, meeting him at Battleground Beta. The class erupted once again, eagerly jumping out of their seats to grab their suitcases. I stood up slowly, walking over to where mine was. As I picked it up, something caught my eye, a note taped to the top of the case. It was from Hisashi and Inko Midoriya, my parents. A lump formed in my throat as I stared at the note. I peeled it off and unfolded the paper, reading their words. They acknowledged that things hadn't been easy between us and expressed their hope that this could be a small step forward. Even after everything that had happened, they understood if I didn't see them as parents, but they loved me and were proud of me. They hoped the suit could symbolize a new beginning for us. A new beginning? I scoffed at the thought. Did they really believe that a fancy suit could fix everything? After all the neglect and betrayal, did they think that words on paper would make it all better? As I stood there gripping the note tightly, I heard a soft voice behind me. It was Izumi, my sister. She nervously mentioned that our parents hoped this would be a start, but her words didn't change anything for me. The damage was done. I muttered coldly that this changed nothing between us and didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the locker room. Once inside, I took a deep breath and opened the suitcase. Inside was my hero costume, and it looked incredible. The design was sleek and practical, a perfect blend of form and function. It was mostly black with dark green accents, lightweight yet durable, meant for stealth. It featured a hoodie with pointed tips and a mask similar to the one I had as Nemesis, covering most of my face except for my eyes. It was tight-fitting yet flexible, with reinforced padding for protection, though I didn't really need it. As I ran my fingers over the material, I felt conflicted. The suit was amazing, but it didn't change what was broken inside. It was just a cover, like the mask I wore around everyone else. As I made my way to Battleground Beta, the first person I saw was Achiko Uraraka. She waved at me with a huge grin, clearly excited for the upcoming exercise. Her hero costume was simple but effective, a skin-tight black bodysuit with pink lines emphasizing her natural flexibility and mobility. She wore thick, round gauntlets on her wrists, designed to help her use her quirk without feeling the strain. It was a sharp look that suited her perfectly. As soon as I got close enough, she exclaimed that my hero outfit looked cool. I gave her a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of my neck and thanking her. "Your costume looks great too. It really suits you." Before Izuku could say anything else, Kirishima strolled up, his bright red hair spiking in every direction as usual. His outfit exuded toughness, featuring a sleeveless red leather vest, black breathes, and massive boots. A long, jagged chest plate protected his core, and he grinned when he saw Izuku, giving him a thumbs up. Kirishima complimented Izuku's costume, calling it manly, his sharp teeth gleaming in his grin. Izuku chuckled awkwardly, thanking Kirishima and returning the compliment about his rugged appearance. Tsuyu, who had become a regular presence by Izuku's side, expressed her approval of his outfit, and he responded with a shy acknowledgement. Next came Lida, striding in with the same intensity he always had. His hero costume closely resembled his older brother Ingenium's sleek blue and white armor, covering most of his body, with engines built into his calves to amplify his speed. The helmet he wore completed the look, and Izuku blinked, realizing the resemblance he had almost forgotten. Lida gave Izuku a respectful nod, commenting on the functionality of his costume, which Izuku appreciated, trying to match Lita's formal tone. Momo smiled at Izuku, saying the outfit suited him. Izuku gazed at her revealing outfit, trying to hide his blush, feeling overwhelmed by the changes of 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐻. He managed to compliment her unique style, while Mineta, nearby, drooled over Momo's outfit, earning a playful smack from Mina, who gave Izuku a thumbs up. As he stood there, Toru made her presence known, her cheerful voice reaching him even though he couldn't see her. She complimented his outfit, and Izuku smiled, grateful for her kind words. Despite the praise, Izuku felt puzzled about why everyone was so excited about his suit. After all, it was just a costume. He planned to thank Hisashi for designing it. Glancing down, he admired the upgraded version of his previous suit, sleek in black and green with energy-absorbing fibers woven into the fabric. Curious about its effectiveness, he activated 𝗏𝗏 just a little. Tiny wisps of energy swirled around him, and the suit absorbed the excess power, glowing slightly. It was a significant improvement over his old outfit. As he turned to the side, his eyes landed on Toru again, and with 𝗏𝗏 active, he could finally see her. She had long, messy light green hair that fell past her shoulders, and her eyes widened in surprise. She wore her usual skin-tight costume, which now felt too revealing to him. Feeling his face heat up, he looked away and suggested that Toru might want to wear something less revealing. There was a pause before she exclaimed in shock that he could see her. Her shout drew the attention of everyone nearby, and Izuku sighed in frustration, covering his face. Mina commented on Toru's loudness, and Izuku felt the weight of his classmates' gazes. Toru repeated her disbelief, and Izuku awkwardly confirmed that he could see her. She seemed emotional, and Izuku felt a pang of guilt for making her feel that way. He apologized, unsure how to handle the situation, when All Might's commanding voice boomed, interrupting the awkward moment. He announced that they would be practicing a heroes versus villains scenario, where the villains would guard a bomb, and the heroes had to recover it within a strict time limit. Lita immediately raised his hand, firing off questions about the rules, while All Might answered him, excitement evident in his demeanor. When it was time to select teams, Izuku ended up paired with Achiko as one of the heroes. She bounced with excitement, her energy infectious, and Izuku smiled back, though his mind raced with thoughts about the upcoming challenge. On the villain side, the first team consisted of Izumi, his sister, and Lita. Izuku felt a strange tension as he realized All Might had chosen the teams, and his gaze lingered on the hero. Katsumi muttered nearby, expressing her frustration about not being on the villain team, which made Izuku hope she was simply wishing to switch teams rather than being upset about his pairing with Achiko. As they prepared to begin, Izuku felt the weight of the situation. He glanced at Achiko, who was stretching, and then at Izumi, who was strategizing with Lita. Despite his improvements since his time as Nemesis, he knew he had much to prove. Achiko turned to him with a serious look, her voice slightly shaky as she asked if he was ready. Izuku smiled, trying to ease her nerves, and reassured her that he had a plan. She looked surprised, and he nodded confidently, ready to face the challenge ahead. Izuku felt confident as they entered the building. He removed his glove and placed his bare hand against the wall. Instantly, lines of glowing energy spread from his palm, weaving throughout the structure. He could sense everything, every object, every person, every movement. It was as if he could see without seeing, his senses heightened to the point where he could detect the faintest vibrations from footsteps and the tiniest shifts in the air. He informed Achiko that Lita was guarding the bomb upstairs and instructed her to retrieve it and place it in the center of the room. Achiko blinked at him, confused, and asked how she was supposed to do that. He handed her a few small rocks and explained that her quirk allowed her to make things weightless. She could use the stones to distract Lita by throwing them at him and making them float around him. He noted that while Lita was fast, he became predictable when focused on dodging. Realization dawned on Achiko, and she acknowledged his plan with enthusiasm. Izuku reminded her to focus on the mission and to retreat if things became too dangerous. She nodded with determination, promising not to let him down. As she ran off, he admired her spirit, though he worried about her safety. With Achiko's task underway, Izuku shifted his focus to his own. He muttered, "Shadow steps," and energy coursed through him as he vanished. Moving at incredible speeds, he zipped through the building, faster than most could comprehend. Even at just 15% of his power, he was outpacing anyone else at the school. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the entire floor. A shockwave tore through the hallway, narrowly missing him as he darted to the side, weaving effortlessly through the debris. He landed softly, eyes narrowed, and noticed Izumi standing in front of him. Her hero suit was sleek and armored, a familiar mix of green and black. The sight of her outfit, modeled after a design he had drawn as a child, tightened something in his chest, but he pushed the feeling aside. Izumi declared that she wouldn't let him pass, raising her fist with determination. This was not the sister he once knew. She had been shaped by years of training and ambition. He simply nodded and responded with an okay. Without hesitation, he charged forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. Izumi was ready, her reflexes sharp as she released her quirk, creating a shockwave that sent a pulse of energy straight at him. The force cracked the walls and sent a torrent of wind down the corridor. For a moment, he disappeared into the storm of dust and debris. Izumi scanned the aftermath, searching for any sign of movement. When the dust cleared, she froze. He stood unharmed, surrounded by a translucent barrier of dark energy that absorbed the force of her attack effortlessly. He calmly lowered his hand, revealing the shield and taunting her to do better. Izumi's eyes widened in shock as he appeared in front of her. He didn't hesitate, throwing a punch with enough force to create shockwaves in the air. She barely raised her arms in time to block, and the impact sent her flying backward, crashing into a wall. He wasn't finished. He reappeared in front of her again, delivering a powerful kick that sent her crashing through several walls. As he prepared to press the attack, another shockwave hit him head-on. He struggled to hold his ground as dark tendrils of energy sprouted from his body, stabilizing him against the blast. Despite the immense force, he remained standing. Izumi appeared right in front of him, her aura crackling with energy as she activated her full cowling. Without hesitation, she threw a punch, which he caught, feeling the jolt travel through his arm. They engaged in a rapid exchange of blows, their fists colliding with explosive power. Izumi's movements were fluid and precise, a testament to her training. While her strength was impressive, he recognized the gaps in her technique. He countered with quick jabs, dodging her strikes with ease and landing blows where her defenses were weakest. She attempted a high kick aimed at his head, but he ducked and stepped inside her guard, delivering an elbow to her ribs. She gasped in pain but quickly recovered, launching a powerful right hook. He twisted his body to dodge and retaliated with a knee to her stomach. She coughed, but before he could follow up, she unleashed a massive shockwave from her hand, aiming to blow him away. Determined not to be defeated, he shouted, "Nightmare grasp." Dark energy surged around his hands, forming a claw that sliced through her shockwave. The energy split apart, but the force still pushed him back several feet. I skidded to a halt, glaring at her through the haze of energy. Izumi appeared behind me in a flash, ready to strike, but before she could land a hit, she collided with my barrier. The impact sent her flying backward, her body crashing into the ground with a loud thud. Before she could recover, I was already in front of her again. I grabbed her by the collar and slammed her into the floor with force. She cried out, struggling as she felt the impact reverberate through her body. Despite the pain, she wasn't finished yet. With determination, she activated her power, and the ground beneath her feet cracked as she surged with energy. A shockwave blasted from her chest, sending me flying backward. I twisted in midair, landing on my feet with ease, but before I could react, she struck again. Izumi appeared above me, her fist descending like a meteor. The force of her punch made the air tremble, and when it hit the ground, it felt as if an earthquake had struck. But as the dust cleared, I stood there, completely unharmed. My barrier had absorbed the full force of her attack. I released the shield and cracked my neck, the energy swirling around me. Clenching my fist, I charged forward, driving it into her gut. She let out a sharp cry, her body folding over my fist as the air was knocked from her lungs. There was no time for her to recover. I wasn't finished. In mere seconds, I unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks, each one faster and stronger than the last. My movements were a blur, almost impossible to track. Every hit landed with precision, amplifying the impact. Her body jerked with each blow, and she was sent flying again, skidding across the floor. She coughed, her breathing ragged, her hero suit in tatters after the relentless barrage. The tension in the observation room was thick as Class 1A watched the battle unfold between Izuku and Izumi. Their eyes widened with every move Izuku made, his techniques crisp and precise, his control over his quirk absolute. He moved with a fluidity and confidence none of them had ever seen before, not even in pro heroes. Katsumi gritted her teeth, the weight of her pride pressing down hard as she stared at the screen, struggling to comprehend how Deku had become this strong. Shoto, usually calm, couldn't hide his surprise, noting that he was a completely different person from the Izuku they once knew. Katsuki, feeling the sting of their childhood rivalry, growled in realization that Deku had surpassed them all. Shiori's voice trembled as she acknowledged Izuku's strength, recognizing that he was now stronger than Izumi, who had been the strongest in their group. The rest of Class 1A could hardly believe their eyes. Kaminari muttered in awe, while Kirishima leaned forward, impressed by Izuku's fighting style. Jiraiya shook her head, still processing the fight, and Tsuyu, her eyes glued to the screen, felt as if she were watching two pro heroes battle. Others remained silent, simply observing. Aizawa, arms crossed, stood next to All Might, his eyes fixed on the battle. Aizawa questioned whether All Might had paired them up on purpose, to which All Might nodded slightly, revealing he had his reasons. Back to Izuku, another shockwave slammed into me, forcing me back a few steps. Izumi charged in immediately after, her body spinning as she delivered a powerful roundhouse kick, her leg cloaked in energy. I read her movements, knowing she was trying to end this quickly. Timing my counter perfectly, I coated my fist in energy and met her kick head-on. The impact was colossal, sending dust and debris flying as the floor cracked under the pressure. As the smoke cleared, Izumi's leg showed signs of injury, but she straightened herself, breathing heavily. She acknowledged my strength, declaring that she wouldn't give up. I admired her tenacity, questioning how long she could keep this up. Red veins of energy spread across her body as she activated her full cowling at 30%. Despite the visible strain, she pushed forward with determination in her eyes, vowing to defeat me. I shook my head, feeling a mix of pity and respect for her resolve. Then we clashed. Our movements became a blur, fists flying at incredible speeds, legs sweeping and elbows striking, every inch of the battlefield alive with the sound of combat. The sheer force of our punches created shockwaves, sending debris flying. Izumi rushed forward with her right hook aimed at my jaw. I ducked under the blow and retaliated with an uppercut, but she spun gracefully mid-dodge, avoiding the hit and bringing her knee up toward my ribs. I blocked her strike, feeling the sharp pain shoot through my arm, but before she could follow up, I stepped forward and sent a quick jab toward her face. She leaned back, narrowly avoiding it, and countered with a spinning kick to my side. I twisted just enough to evade the blow and responded with a sharp elbow aimed at her shoulder. My elbow connected, and she stumbled back, momentarily losing her balance. But she quickly recovered, gritting her teeth through the pain, and launched herself at me again, her fists blazing with energy. Her attacks were wild yet precise, sending rapid jabs to my chest as she tried to break my guard. I weaved between her punches, catching one of her wrists and pulling her off balance. Using the momentum, I spun her around and aimed to bring my knee into her gut, but she flipped out of the hold, landing gracefully on her feet. She was fast, very fast, but I was faster. As she landed, I closed the distance, appearing in front of her before she could react. I brought my fist down in a hammer strike, but she deflected it with her forearm, countering with a swift punch aimed at my gut. I twisted to the side, dodging the hit, and sent a low kick to sweep her legs from under her. She jumped over the sweep, using her quirk to enhance her reflexes, and came down with a double-fisted hammer blow aimed at my head. I raised both arms, crossing them to block as the impact of her strike sent tremors through my body. My feet dug into the cracked floor as I braced myself. We were relentless. Every punch, every kick, every counter was faster and more precise. The sound of our battle echoed through the room, filling it with the clash of raw strength and power. Izumi was giving it everything she had, but I could see it. She was starting to falter. Her movements were growing unsteady, her attacks losing their precision. I ducked under a wild punch and delivered a powerful sidekick to her ribs. She gasped, flying back and crashing into the wall. She coughed, a small amount of blood trickling from her lips, but still she stood. With a fierce determination in her eyes, she gathered all her remaining strength into her fist. Her hand crackled with an immense shockwave, the energy warping the air around it. She unleashed her final attack, channeling everything into one powerful move. I smiled, gathering a pulsating orb of energy in my hand, declaring it a decisive moment. We shouted simultaneously as our final attacks collided in a brilliant explosion of power. A shockwave surged through the air, engulfing the entire battlefield in light and sound, the top of the building tearing apart from the force of the impact. The explosion sent shockwaves through the air, shattering windows and ripping through the structure. Most of the impact traveled upwards due to the central point of collision in our attack, tearing through the roof and revealing 𝗂𝗃𝗁, who was using her gravity quirk to keep a missile in place, her eyes wide with concern. Ida was sprawled on the ground, his suit battered but intact. I gave 𝗂𝗃𝗁 a thumbs up, and she blushed in response. My gaze shifted back to Izumi, who lay on the ground, her body clearly exhausted. Her arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, and she was breathing heavily, but despite the pain, she looked at me with a fierce determination that had yet to wane. I acknowledged her effort, recognizing that our shared past had shaped us both. She blinked, then hesitantly took my hand, whispering her gratitude, her voice weak but sincere. 𝗂𝗃𝗁 rushed to my side, her face bright with relief, celebrating our victory. I smiled softly in response, feeling the weight of our accomplishment. Ida, having recovered from the blast, stood up and approached me. His uniform was singed, but he seemed unharmed, complimenting the match. I shook his hand, grateful for his support. Then, All Might's booming voice echoed across the room, announcing our victory. Meanwhile, Team C cautiously advanced through a dark building, tension thick in the air. Shoto Todoroki led the way, his mismatched eyes scanning the environment, while Mizo Shoji extended his arms, equipped with extra eyes and ears to detect any movement. Shoji whispered that someone was to the left, and Shoto nodded, preparing to unleash his ice powers. Suddenly, Katsumi Bakugo burst from a nearby doorway, her hands igniting in flames and taunting Shoto. She unleashed a blast of fiery energy, but Shoto swiftly raised an ice wall, blocking the flames as they melted upon impact. He muttered to himself, realizing the challenge she posed. Katsumi grinned wickedly, her flames intensifying, and propelled herself forward with a jet of fire, aiming a punch at Shoto's head. Shoto called for Shoji, who quickly wrapped his arms around Katsumi from behind. She snarled, engulfing herself in flames, forcing Shoji to release her. As she prepared another attack, Shoto took his chance, encasing her feet in ice, but she grinned wider, refusing to be defeated. With an explosive burst of flame, the ice shattered, and Shoto staggered back, amazed at her raw power. Before he could react, 𝗵𝗄𝐺 swung into action, firing strands of tape to bind Shoto. But Shoto was quick, releasing a blast of ice that froze the tape, allowing him to break free. His left side began to glow red as flames erupted from his body, clashing with Katsumi's own. The two flames met in midair, creating a blazing inferno that lit up the entire building. It was a battle of raw strength versus controlled power, neither side willing to yield. Meanwhile, Shoji engaged with 𝗧𝗏, blocking incoming tape strands while closing the distance. He struck 𝗧𝗏 with a powerful punch, knocking the wind out of him. Katsumi, determined not to lose, intensified her flames, but Shoto smirked, declaring her defeat as he froze the ground beneath her, sending her sprawling as Shoji subdued 𝗧𝗏 once and for all. In another part of the building, Team E moved quickly through the large office complex, taking advantage of Tsuyu's agility and Minata's sticky ball. Tsuyu cautioned her teammate to be careful, aware of the enemy's capabilities. A beam of bright light shot past them, confirming her fears as 𝐒𝐻𝐈 naval laser reflected off mirrors created by Momo, complicating their strategy. Tsuyu leaped onto the ceiling, instructing Minato to slow down the enemies with his sticky ball. He confidently threw them around, ensuring that any approaching foes would get stuck. Meanwhile, Momo strategized, instructing Yuga to keep firing his lasers while she created a shield and a long staff for defense. Yuga continued firing, but Tsuyu's agility allowed her to dodge the beams effortlessly, setting the stage for an intense showdown. Tsuyu swung herself closer, grabbing Minato along the way. She encouraged him, ready to face their opponents together. With a mighty leap, Tsuyu hurled Minato toward Yuga, his sticky ball trailing behind him. Yuga yelled in surprise as one of the balls stuck to his arm, hindering his aim. Momo stepped in, using her staff to swipe at Tsuyu, but the frog-like heroine was quick, dodging the attack and countering with a swift kick. Momo stumbled but retaliated, summoning a net to capture Tsuyu. Just when it seemed Tsuyu was trapped, Minato threw another sticky ball, causing Momo's net to tangle and become ineffective. Tsuyu praised Minato for his timely assistance as she freed herself and quickly bound both Momo and Yuga, claiming victory for the heroes. In another arena, Team G, consisting of Denki Kaminari and Kyoka Jiro, entered a dimly lit building filled with tension. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the challenge ahead, especially with Bakugo's relentless aggression and Tokoyami's mastery over his dark shadow. Jiro plugged her earphone jacks into the ground, sending out sound waves to detect movement. She noted two signals approaching them quickly. Suddenly, Tokoyami emerged from the shadows, his dark shadow looming behind him. He declared that the darkness awaited their defeat. Before they could react, an explosion erupted from behind them as Bakugo barreled through the wall, shouting fiercely. Jiro quickly shoved Kaminari out of the way just in time to avoid the blast, the shockwave sending them tumbling across the floor. They quickly regained their footing, ready to fight. Jiro reminded Kaminari to stay on guard, knowing Bakugo wouldn't give them a moment to breathe. Kaminari, electricity crackling around him, prepared to keep Bakugo busy while Jiro focused on Tokoyami. Bakugo lunged at Kaminari, palm outstretched to unleash another explosion, but Denki smirked and sent a bolt of electricity toward him. Bakugo twisted in midair, using an explosion to propel himself upward and evade the attack, taunting Kaminari about his weak sparks. As Bakugo kept Kaminari occupied, Jiro turned her attention to Tokoyami, asserting that while he had the advantage in darkness, she had the rhythm. She sent powerful vibrations toward him, causing Dark Shadow to recoil from the sonic assault. Tokoyami commanded Dark Shadow to advance, and it lunged forward with incredible speed. Jiro barely managed to dodge, her heart racing at the sight of its power. The battle between Kaminari and Bakugo intensified as they exchanged blows, sparks of electricity clashing with fiery explosions, illuminating the corridor. Kaminari taunted Bakugo, challenging him to bring more to the fight. Bakugo sneered, determined to end it quickly, launching himself at Kaminari with explosions blazing from his hands. Kaminari activated his full power, lightning crackling around him as he grabbed Bakugo's arm, releasing a massive surge of electricity. Bakugo screamed as the electricity coursed through him but refused to back down. With sheer force of will, he blasted himself away from Kaminari, smoke rising from his body. Kaminari, strained but determined, focused his remaining energy, sending out one last, massive bolt of lightning that struck Bakugo directly in the chest. Bakugo fell to his knees, his strength fading and collapsed. Team G emerged victorious, but both Kaminari and Jiro soon collapsed, utterly drained from the intense fight. Meanwhile, Team I, consisting of Shiori Kuroda and Koji Koda, cautiously navigated through the dimly lit building. Shiori's eyes glowed faintly as frost fire emanated from her hands, illuminating the dark corridors. She instructed Koda to stay close, emphasizing the need to find their opponents before being found. Koda nodded, using his quirk to communicate with the insects in the building, informing Shiori that their opponents were hiding on the second floor. As they reached the stairwell, Ichiro Kirishima appeared before them, his body hardened like solid rock. He declared that they wouldn't get past him and charged forward. Shiori unleashed a stream of frost fire at him, but Kirishima stood firm, the flames rolling off his hardened skin without effect. Shiori instructed Koda to fall back, but before he could react, an invisible force knocked him to the ground. Tura Hagikure's voice giggled from her unseen form as she declared that Koda was going down. Koda summoned a swarm of insects that clung to Hagikure, giving him a faint outline of her position. He tackled her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. Meanwhile, Shiori faced off against Kirishima, admitting he was tough but challenging him to see how long he could last against her frost fire. She unleashed a massive blast toward him, and to his surprise, he felt the ice creeping up his arms, freezing him in place. "What the hell?" he yelled, struggling to break free, but Shiori only intensified her grip, encasing him in a solid block of ice. She commanded him to stay down, breathing heavily as she approached Koda, who was still wrestling with Hagikure. Koda finally managed to secure Hagikure with some ropes he had found, breathing with effort. Shiori looked back at the frozen form of Kirishima and confirmed their victory. The battle training was finally over, and the adrenaline slowly left their systems. The cheers, the energy, the rush, everyone could still feel it coursing through their veins. As they walked back to the central area where All Might stood, Izuku felt a familiar presence next to him. Achiko's cheerful voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to face her, her bright smile lighting up the dimly lit corridor. She expressed her gratitude, saying that if not for him, she wasn't sure how she would have passed. Izuku chuckled, scratching the back of his head, downplaying his role in their success. He acknowledged her adaptability and strength during the training. Achiko's cheeks flushed slightly as she thanked him again, her eyes softening. For a moment, Izuku felt a warmth in his chest that he couldn't quite place. She then asked him if he cared about her, catching him off guard. He responded earnestly, affirming their friendship. Her gentle giggle made his heart skip a beat, and he quickly looked away, trying to regain his composure. Before he could respond further, Kirishima and the others approached, their faces lighting up with excitement as they discussed the match he had just had with Izumi. Kirishima enthusiastically praised Izuku's performance, while Kaminari and Shiro chimed in with their own compliments, expressing their admiration for his skills. Mina bounced on her heels, eager to learn his techniques. Izuku felt his face heat up again, still unaccustomed to such praise. He managed to thank everyone, explaining that he had simply done what he thought would work in the moment. Kirishima's eyes sparkled with admiration as he declared that Izuku had been incredibly manly during the battle. A warm feeling settled in Izuku's chest, and he smiled sheepishly, appreciating their positive words after all his hard work. Just then, All Might's voice boomed across the training ground, capturing everyone's attention. He praised their remarkable progress and the spirit of true heroes they had shown. He reminded them that both victory and defeat were essential to their journey, emphasizing that a hero is defined by the strength of their heart and their resolve to keep moving forward. Izuku felt the weight of All Might's words settle over them, filling him with determination. He glanced around at his classmates, seeing their determined expressions. All Might continued, stating that their training was far from over and that they would face more challenges ahead. He encouraged them to take what they had learned and let it fuel their passion, reminding them that they would one day embody justice and hope. The class erupted into cheers, and Izuku felt his heart race in time with their excitement, his resolve hardening. This was what he had always dreamed of. Surrounded by his friends and classmates, he felt truly alive. Achiko nudged him with her elbow, playfully reminding him of his amazing performance. He rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress the smile on his lips, feeling that warmth in his chest spread. Maybe he was getting closer to becoming the hero he always wanted to be. My thoughts wandered, replaying the moments from the day. I had just turned a corner when suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm and pushed me against the wall. Before I could react, another hand slammed into the wall next to my head. It was her. Midnight greeted me with a teasing tone, her voice low and playful. She traced the outline of my jaw, and her touch sent a shiver down my spine, causing my face to heat up. I tried to maintain my composure, but my blush gave me away. I felt the urge to remind her that we were in school and suggested we save this for later. She responded with a wicked grin, her eyes sparkling with amusement, clearly enjoying my embarrassment. I glanced nervously down the hallway, my heart racing as I expressed my concern about being seen. Deep down, I knew that even if I used my power to vanish, she would still find me. Her grin widened, and she whispered that I had been getting too close to the girls in Class 1. Leaning in closer, her body pressed against mine and I froze. She reminded me of who I belonged to, and before I could respond, she kissed me. The kiss started softly but quickly intensified, leaving me lightheaded. Her hands slid to the back of my neck, holding me in place as she deepened the kiss. I was overwhelmed by a mix of warmth and something possessive. I couldn't move, my mind going blank as I focused solely on the sensation of her lips against mine. My heart raced and I felt my face grow hotter. When she finally pulled away, I gasped for breath, my entire face flushed with embarrassment. I felt weak in the knees, like a deer caught in headlights. I stammered her name, still trying to catch my breath and reminding her that we were in school. My words were barely coherent, and I cursed myself for sounding so flustered. She chuckled darkly, her lips still dangerously close to mine, and repeated that if someone saw us, it wouldn't matter. She had noticed how the girls looked at me and felt the need to remind me that I was hers. Her words sent a jolt through me, and I swallowed nervously, looking away from her intense gaze. I muttered something under my breath, trying to defuse the situation, though my voice lacked confidence. She tilted her head, a glint in her eyes, and moved her hand to my waist, gripping it tightly. Her voice was low and menacing as she insisted she wasn't jealous. I flinched slightly at her grip but forced myself to meet her gaze, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She smiled, but there was something predatory in her expression. She claimed to be protective, mentioning how the girls had been paying attention to me. I froze at the realization that she had been watching me. Before I could respond, she leaned in again, whispering that she was curious. I could sense the jealousy in the air, and it made me even more nervous. When I tried to speak, she pressed her fingers against my lips to silence me, assuring me that I didn't need to explain. She tilted my chin to meet her gaze, reminding me that I belonged to her and no one else. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to push her away and run, but another part was drawn to her intensity. I forced myself to speak, trying to maintain some semblance of control. Her grip tightened, pulling me closer, and her face was only inches from mine. She insisted again that she wasn't jealous, but her tone suggested otherwise. I swallowed hard, my heart racing as I met her gaze. I started to say her name, but the words died in my throat. She chuckled softly, tracing my jawline again, teasing me about being unable to respond. I didn't know how to handle her. This was something entirely different from what I had experienced before. She leaned in, her lips hovering just above mine, and whispered that I should remember I was hers and that she didn't share. Before I could react, she pressed her lips against mine once more, sealing her words with another fierce kiss that felt possessive, as if she was claiming me. My face flushed again, but I didn't resist. I didn't have the strength to. When she finally pulled away, she gave me one last lingering look, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She purred that she would see me around and sauntered down the hallway as if nothing had happened. I stood there, leaning against the wall, still trying to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. My mind was spinning and my heart was racing. What had just happened? I ran a hand through my hair, still feeling the warmth of her lips against mine and the grip of her hands on my waist. This was getting out of hand, I thought to myself. Way out of hand. But no matter how hard he tried to shake the feeling, he couldn't help but think something was wrong with her. And why did he find that attractive? Finally reaching his room, his mind was still spinning from the intense encounter in the hallway. He needed a moment to clear his head. But as he opened the door, he froze. His breath caught in his throat, and his face immediately flushed crimson. There, standing in the middle of his room, was 𝗵𝗎. But this wasn't just any 𝗵𝗎. She wore deep crimson lingerie, almost matching the shade of her usual hero costume but far more daring. The fabric clung to her curves, thin straps tracing the outline of her body, barely covering her in strategic places. The sheer lace left little to the imagination, her long legs accentuated by thigh-high stockings. The low-cut BR highlighted her figure, and her hair cascaded down her shoulders, adding to her sultry appearance. He felt his face heat up, blood rushing to his cheeks. His eyes instinctively darted away. He stammered, overwhelmed by the sight. She chuckled softly, the sound low and teasing, sending chills down his spine. She asked if he liked it, her voice dripping with amusement, fully aware of the effect she was having on him. He could hear her footsteps, slow and deliberate, as she began walking towards him. His back was still to her, but he felt her presence getting closer, the air around him growing warmer. He wanted to move, but he was frozen in place, his mind a mess of panic, embarrassment, and something else. He muttered that he didn't know what to say, his heart pounding in his chest. He kept his eyes firmly on the floor, afraid that if he looked at her, he would combust from the heat of his blush. She teased him, urging him to look at her. He shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut as if that would make the situation disappear. He managed to squeak out that this wasn't appropriate, though his voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, he felt her hand on his chin, soft and warm, gently tilting his head up. She repeated her command, her voice softer this time but no less commanding. Reluctantly, he opened his eyes, slowly rising his gaze until he met hers. Her eyes, filled with mischief and longing, locked onto his, and his breath caught in his throat again. He tried to avoid looking at her, but it was impossible not to notice the way the lingerie clung to her figure. His blush deepened. She grinned, clearly pleased with his reaction, whispering that it was better this way. He swallowed hard, struggling to form a coherent response, but nothing came out. He felt like a fish out of water, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process the situation. Finally, he blurted out that she was going to get them in trouble and worried about what would happen if someone saw them, especially Aizawa-sensei. Her smile widened, her fingers gently caressing his jawline as she leaned in closer, suggesting that it didn't matter. She claimed they weren't doing anything wrong. His eyes widened at her words, and he instinctively took a step back, only to find himself pressed against the wall. He protested weakly that she wasn't supposed to be in there, his heart racing. He tried to resist the temptation, but her presence was overwhelming. She seemed amused by his flustered state, taking another step forward, closing the distance between them. She teased him, saying he was cute when he was nervous. He tried to avert his gaze again, but she stopped him, brushing her thumb against his lips, making his whole body tense. She whispered that there was no need to be shy, that she came there just for him. His mind raced, unsure of how to handle the situation. He tried to argue that they couldn't be together or have fun, but she interrupted, suggesting he deserved to relax after working so hard. Her hand moved to his shoulder, sending shivers down his spine. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing against his ear, asking why he thought it was a bad idea. He stammered that it was different from before, but she pressed her body against his, her hand sliding up to the back of his neck, questioning if he really wanted to pull away. He felt panic rise within him, struggling to protest, but the words got stuck in his throat. She chuckled softly, tracing the outline of his jaw, whispering that he didn't have to pretend with her. She claimed to know exactly what he was thinking. His heart raced as he asked if she really did. She nodded, her grin widening, saying she had been watching him. She leaned in, dangerously close, claiming to know how stressed he had been and how to help him relax. He tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go, his back pressed against the wall. He muttered that they really shouldn't, though he could hear the hesitation in his voice. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with amusement, insisting that no one would know and it would be their little secret. Her fingers brushed against his lips, and she took the lead, her hands roaming over his body with expert precision, pinning him beneath her as she claimed his mouth in a heated kiss. Izuku's hands fumbled with the laces of her undergarments, finally freeing her large, heaving boobs. He cupped them reverently, his thumbs brushing over her skin and drawing soft sounds of pleasure from her lips. Midnight commented on his skill, her eyes lidded with longing, expressing surprise at his abilities. Izuku flushed, shyly averting his gaze, claiming he was merely following her lead. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 chuckled, capturing his chin to force him to meet her smoldering gaze, assuring him that she would make sure he felt good. She pushed him down onto the bed, straddling his hips as she reached for the fastenings of his briefs. With a swift tug, she had them off, revealing his excitement. Midnight's eyes widened, a blush coloring her cheeks as she acknowledged his impressive reaction. Izuku groaned at her touch, his body responding involuntarily. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 giggled, leaning down to tease him further, her playful actions drawing out his reactions. She began to move with a rhythm that left Izuku breathless, his senses overwhelmed by the sensations. It didn't take long before he reached a peak of pleasure, his body responding to her every movement. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 continued to tease him, ensuring he felt every moment of bliss. She crawled up his body to share a kiss, their connection deepening as they exchanged warmth and intimacy. Izuku could only cling to her, his heart racing. When she finally drew back, flushed and breathing, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 praised him for his performance, petting his damp hair. Izuku could only hum in response, still lost in the aftermath of their shared experience. He pulled her down for another kiss, feeling a renewed interest as the night was still young and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 had plenty more to teach him. As they embraced, their bodies entwined in a passionate dance, 𝗵𝗲𝗄's figure pressed against Izuku's lean physique, her breaths coming in quick succession. She straddled him, feeling the heat of their connection. Izuku's face flushed crimson, caught between longing and hesitation. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 reassured him that if he wanted to stop, he only needed to say so, her hands roaming over his chest and tracing the scars that told the story of his past. Izuku swallowed hard, expressing his longing to continue. A sultry smile played across 𝗵𝗲𝗄's lips as she prepared for the next step. Rising up, she positioned herself, and with a soft she embraced their connection fully. They both cried out in joy, overwhelmed by the sensations that enveloped them. As they moved together, their bodies became a tangle of limbs and shared breaths. Izuku lost himself in the rhythm, feeling the heat and passion between them. The sounds of their movements filled the room, a symphony of shared pleasure. As they approached their peaks, Izuku felt the intensity building, and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 urged him on, wanting to feel the culmination of their connection. With a powerful release, they clung to each other, shuddering through the aftershocks of their shared experience. Finally, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 collapsed atop Izuku's chest, both of them spent and slick with sweat. She nuzzled into his neck, pressing soft kisses to his skin. Izuku expressed his feelings, wrapping his arms around her, and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 smiled, her heart full. They basked in the afterglow, their hearts and bodies intertwined as one. Hours later, as they lay together, the warmth of her body against his, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 rested her head on his chest, tracing patterns on his skin. The room was quiet, save for the sound of their breathing. She shifted slightly, lifting her head to meet his gaze and teasingly asked how he felt about their time together. Izuku blushed, admitting it had been amazing and expressing a longing to experience it again. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 smiled, her eyes twinkling with amusement, but there was a deeper sincerity behind them. Resting her head back down, she spoke more seriously, wanting to share something with him. Izuku sensed a shift in her mood and looked down, concern etching his brow as he prepared to listen. Izuku noticed something was troubling her and searched her face for an answer. She bit her lip, appearing hesitant as if she were trying to find the right words. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, expressing her apology. Confusion washed over Izuku as he wondered what she meant. Had he done something wrong? 𝗵𝗲𝗄 lifted her head, meeting his gaze fully. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and emotion welled up inside her as she began to explain. She admitted to being dishonest from the start, revealing her feelings of guilt. She confessed that during their first outing when she kissed him and he asked what they were, she had said what she thought would help him heal, without considering how deep their connection might grow. Her voice wavered, and she looked away, guilt evident in her expression. She acknowledged her selfishness in wanting to help him but admitted that her feelings had evolved into something deeper. Izuku was taken aback by her honesty, sensing the sincerity and regret in her voice, which made his heart ache. He gently reassured her, acknowledging that he had thought the same thing, that their relationship might just be a phase for him. He expressed his longing for love, not needing a parental figure but someone who genuinely cared for him. He explained how 𝗵𝗲 had shown him kindness in a way he had never experienced before, which was why he had fallen for her. As she listened, her eyes softened, and she reached up to gently touch his face, revealing her vulnerability. Izuku continued, emphasizing that she didn't have to go out of her way for him, but her actions meant the world to him. He reassured her that her age didn't matter, she was special to him. A small, shaky smile appeared on her face, and for a moment, it seemed as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. She whispered that he was special to her too, more than he knew. They shared a quiet moment, allowing the silence to envelop them. After a few moments, 𝗵𝗲 spoke again, her tone lighter yet serious. She mentioned that teacher-student relationships were no longer considered taboo as long as there was consent from guardians and no public displays of affection during school hours. Izuku nodded, aware of the changing societal views, though he still felt a bit embarrassed by the idea. He playfully teased her about having broken that rule a few times, recalling some daring moments they had shared at school. She admitted her guilt with a playful glint in her eyes, but her smile faltered as she grew quiet again. Then, softly and hesitantly, she expressed that she didn't mind sharing him. Izuku was taken aback by her words. Just hours ago, she had insisted she wanted him all to herself. Now, she was suggesting something entirely different. He struggled to process her statement, questioning whether she truly meant it. She confirmed her thoughts, explaining that she understood he had big dreams of becoming a great hero and that there would be many people in his life who would care for him. She didn't want to be the one to hold him back from experiencing those connections. Izuku's heart raced as he confessed he wasn't ready for that kind of relationship. He wanted to focus on becoming a pro-hero and living a good life, unsure if he could handle anything more. 𝗵𝗲 smiled softly, reassuring him that she wasn't asking him to make any decisions right now. She just wanted him to know that if the time ever came, she wouldn't hold it against him. She expressed her longing for him to be happy, even if it meant sharing him with someone else. She paused, searching for the right words, explaining that society had become more open about relationships. As long as everyone involved was happy and consenting, it was no longer seen as a bad thing. Izuku listened intently, his mind racing as he tried to process everything she had said. He admitted softly that he didn't know if he was cut out for that kind of life. She held his hand with a smile, reassuring him that there was no need to worry. 𝗵𝗲 expressed her love for him and her longing to make him happy, emphasizing that was what truly mattered. They shared a gentle kiss before drifting off to sleep. Standing in front of Principal 𝗧𝗍's office door, he hesitated for a moment before knocking. The battle training from the previous day lingered in his mind, but what weighed more heavily on him was the realization of his own strength and the peculiar position he found himself in among his classmates. He felt too powerful to truly fit in. 𝗧𝗍's voice called him in, and he opened the door to find the principal perched on his desk, surrounded by papers and charts, his sharp eyes studying him intently. 𝗧𝗍 inquired if he needed something, his tone polite yet curious. Feeling awkward, he scratched the back of his neck and admitted he had been thinking about something. 𝗧𝗍 encouraged him to continue. He voiced his concern about the necessity of participating in combat training with his classmates, given his level of power. He felt uncomfortable expressing that he could potentially match All Might at his prime, questioning the point of sparring against his peers. 𝗧𝗍 tilted his head thoughtfully, folding his paws in front of him. He acknowledged that Izuku's power surpassed that of his classmates but reminded him that the training sessions were not solely about testing limits. They were also about helping his peers improve. By sparring with him, they could see a benchmark of strength to aspire to, something that could inspire their growth. Izuku frowned slightly, contemplating 𝗧𝗍's words. He expressed his concern about risking injury to his classmates. 𝗧𝗍 smiled knowingly, revealing that he was aware Izuku had been faking the quirk restraints on his wrists. Izuku froze, feeling as though he had been caught. 𝗧𝗍 explained that his body had adapted to the restraints, allowing him to use his full power without them. Izuku struggled to articulate his thoughts, surprised by the revelation. Nizu reassured him, expressing admiration for his restraint even against Izumi, someone he had complicated feelings for. Izuku nodded, feeling the tension ease from his shoulders as he reflected on his goal to be a symbol for those society had overlooked. He understood the importance of knowing when to use his power and when to hold back. Nizu's eyes gleamed with pride as he praised Izuku's mature perspective and noted his growth since starting at you. Izuku offered a small smile, acknowledging that he had been thinking more clearly since joining the school. Nizu then posed an important question about the danger of All Might being a teacher at you, and Izuku readily agreed that it made the school a target. Nizu expressed his longing for Izuku to protect his classmates, believing that having someone as strong as him watching over them would alleviate many of his concerns. Izuku smiled at the thought, affirming his willingness to help, as many of his classmates were friends, and he understood the stakes involved. Nizu thanked him warmly, pleased with his maturity. As Izuku left the office, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, experiencing a newfound sense of peace. While walking down the hall, he heard a voice call his name. It was Toru, her tone a mix of nerves and excitement. He stopped to face her, curious about what she needed. Toru expressed her longing to talk about something related to the battle training, specifically about the moment he had seen her using her quirk for the first time. She revealed that no one, not even her parents, had ever seen her, and she wanted to know if she was pretty. Her voice trembled, revealing the depth of her vulnerability. Understanding the weight of her words, he felt a surge of sympathy and stepped forward to pull her into a gentle hug. He assured her that she was appealing, and she began to cry softly, trembling in his embrace. Toru expressed her gratitude, and he reassured her that she didn't have to hide from him. He reminded her of her strength, kindness, and beauty, encouraging her to never forget those qualities. They stood together in comforting silence, and despite her invisibility, he felt the warmth of her presence. After a moment, she pulled away, sniffling but smiling softly. She thanked him for everything, feeling better. He smiled back, assuring her he was always there for her. Days later, as he walked through the halls, Nomiuri's words echoed in his mind. Her casual mention of sharing him with other girls left him confused. He pondered whether she was genuinely worried he would leave her for someone his age, a thought that seemed absurd to him. She was incredible in every sense, smart, strong, and appealing. Nomiuri had helped him in more ways than he could count, guiding him through the darkest parts of his life when no one else even knew he was struggling. The thought of leaving her didn't make sense. He couldn't understand why he would ever want to. He shook his head, trying to focus on something else. Pulling out his phone, a gift from Nomiuri, he started browsing through his usual apps, looking for a distraction. Lately, he had been reading a lot of manhwa and manga in his spare time, mostly fantasy and revenge stories. There was something about those narratives, about characters who rose from nothing to seek revenge on those who wronged them, that resonated with him. It felt like an outlet. Revenge of the iron-blooded sword hound was his current obsession. The raw intensity of the main character, who clawed his way through life with sheer determination and grit, spoke to him in ways he couldn't quite explain. As he scrolled through the latest chapters, completely immersed in the world of swords, betrayals, and victories, he heard a voice call out to him. Toru approached, her voice unmistakable. Ever since she discovered he could see her using his quirk, things between them had changed. He had told her it was simply energy manipulation, which wasn't a complete lie, but not the full truth either. His quirk, one above all, allowed him to perceive energies in ways that others couldn't, and he could see the faint outline of her presence even when she was invisible. That little discovery had led to heartfelt moments between them. Toru, who had spent so much of her life being unseen, now had someone who could see her, and it had made her much more friendly, perhaps even a bit clingy at times. He didn't mind, though. He couldn't blame her. It was as if she had been given newfound freedom, and he was the one person she could truly share it with. Toru held up a cheesesteak sandwich, grinning. He was a little surprised when she offered it to him. She laughed, her voice light, and he accepted the sandwich, expressing his gratitude. As he took a bite, savoring the flavors, he felt the warmth of her gaze. The way she hovered just a little too close, her energy radiating comfort and familiarity, was nice. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was becoming more than just friendly. Toru rocked back and forth on her feet, curious about what he was reading. He mentioned the manhwa he was engrossed in, explaining the intense plot about a character betrayed by his clan and seeking revenge. Toru teased him about being serious, expressing her enjoyment in seeing him relaxed and having fun. He felt a slight blush creep onto his cheeks, unsure how to respond. She tilted her head, sensing his curiosity, and asked if he ever took a break from his serious pursuits. He shrugged, feeling a bit self-conscious, admitting that he often forgot how to relax amidst his focus on becoming stronger. Toru brightened at the idea of helping him unwind, suggesting they hang out and do something fun. He smiled awkwardly, not used to such offers, but agreed that it sounded nice. As they continued talking, her laughter and light-hearted energy eased him. However, he noticed someone standing off in the distance, Katsumi. She was watching them, her sharp eyes narrowed, and an intensity in her stare made him uncomfortable. There was something simmering beneath the surface, anger, hurt, or perhaps a mix of both. She didn't approach but merely stood there, her expression tight. He wanted to tell her to leave him alone, but Toru's voice drew him back to the present. She suggested going to the arcade or grabbing lunch, just something fun without stress or pressure. He glanced back at Katsumi, who was already walking away, her hands clenched into fists. He let out a quiet snort and turned back to Toru, forcing a smile, determined not to let Katsumi spoil his mood. He agreed to Toru's suggestion, and as she beamed with excitement, he couldn't help but wonder what was going on with Katsumi. For now, he decided to focus on the moment in front of him. As he exited the restroom, he barely took a step forward when Mineta appeared out of nowhere, standing directly in front of him with a determined look. Izuku blinked in surprise, his usually calm demeanor not showing any hint of confusion. Mineta threw his hands in the air, his voice filled with desperation, demanding to know Izuku's secret to attracting girls. Izuku blinked again, more confused than ever. Mineta insisted that it wasn't possible for him to not know how he managed to get all the girls to like him. Izuku took a moment, tilting his head slightly as he searched for the right words. He admitted that he didn't really do anything special, just tried to be nice to everyone and treat them like friends. Mineta's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he studied Izuku, searching for some hidden trick. Mineta couldn't believe it. He insisted that there had to be some secret formula that Izuku was hiding. Izuku sighed softly, maintaining his calm demeanor. He explained that he wasn't doing anything different. He simply listened when people talked and tried to help when he could. Mineta crossed his arms, pouting in disbelief. He couldn't understand how girls could like someone just for being nice. He paused, looking up at Izuku with suspicion, wondering if there was something charming about him that he wasn't aware of. Izuku's face turned a light shade of pink, clearly embarrassed by the suggestion. He stammered that he wasn't charming and didn't even know how to be. Mineta narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, questioning Izuku's humility. Izuku shook his head, trying to regain his composure, insisting that he was just being himself. Mineta groaned, throwing his hands up in frustration, questioning why being himself worked for Izuku but not for him. Izuku blinked, feeling slightly awkward but still patient. He suggested that maybe Mineta should try not to focus so much on getting people to like him and instead be more relaxed around everyone. Mineta stared at him, unconvinced but too frustrated to argue further. He muttered that he would try Izuku's advice but warned that if it didn't work, he would return for more answers. With that, Mineta turned and marched off, leaving Izuku slightly bewildered by the exchange. As Mineta disappeared around the corner, Izuku let out a small sigh of relief, muttering to himself about how strange that conversation had been. He adjusted his posture and continued down the hall, hoping that would be the end of Mineta's interrogation for the day. Suddenly, an announcement echoed through the halls of 𝐸, repeating a warning about a security breach and instructing all students to evacuate outdoors promptly. The sound rang in Izuku's ears, and before he could fully process the announcement, panic began to spread. He instinctively turned toward the exits, but students were already rushing out, colliding with one another in their haste. Chaos erupted in an instant. Izuku felt his body tense as the waves of students surged past him. Amid the chaos, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. It was Toru, her urgency clear even though he couldn't see her. Activating his quirk, one above all, he sharpened his senses, filtering out the panic and noise to focus on the source of the commotion outside. His eyes narrowed as he realized that reporters had somehow gotten into the school. Ida's voice rose above the crowd, expressing concern about the roughness of the students. Izuku called out, trying to get through the noise, clarifying that it wasn't a villain attack but just reporters who had broken in. Achiko's voice rose in disbelief, questioning how the reporters had managed to enter the school. Izuku admitted he didn't know, trying to maintain his calm amidst the growing chaos. He realized that the students didn't understand the situation, and if the panic continued, someone could get hurt. He needed to think quickly. An idea struck him. Focusing on one above all, he channeled his quirk to grab everyone's attention without causing more panic. He extended his hand, allowing energy to flow from his fingertips, manifesting into wisps of light and subtle vibrations. He sent small pulses throughout the hall, ensuring they were noticeable but not overwhelming. The bursts of light caught the attention of some students, who slowed down and turned their heads toward him, curious. Izuku projected his voice as calmly as possible, urging everyone to listen. He reassured them that there was no villain, just a misunderstanding with reporters outside. As he spoke, he sent out another pulse of light, calming and steady. He encouraged everyone to stop pushing and assured them that if they stayed calm and orderly, no one would get hurt. He reminded them that they were students and needed to remain composed in situations like this. Slowly, the stampede began to dwindle, and the flow of bodies toward the exits became more orderly. Izuku released a final wave of calming energy, ensuring it remained light. He let out a small breath of relief as the crowd thinned out, moving in a much calmer manner. The danger of anyone getting trampled had passed. He flicked off one above all, his senses returning to normal as the students finally exited the building. Looking around, he sensed Toru nearby, along with Ida, Achiko, and Tsuyu, all of them watching him with expressions of surprise and admiration. Izuku felt the weight of the situation lift off his shoulders as he acknowledged their reactions. Achiko praised him for his amazing ability to calm everyone down, while Ida commended his quick thinking and effective use of his quirk. Even Tsuyu, usually calm herself, gave him a small approving nod. Izuku felt a blush rising to his face, mumbling that it was nothing really, and that he just didn't want anyone to get hurt. Toru chimed in, saying he handled the situation like a real leader and that he was amazing. Izuku felt his face heat up more, but he maintained his usual calm expression, even though his heart was pounding. He downplayed the attention, stating that he just did what anyone would have done, but he appreciated their kind words. But at the same time, it felt nice. Izuku hoped the reporters weren't causing too much trouble, trying to shift the focus away from himself. He suggested they head outside to see what was going on. The others nodded, and together they moved toward the doors, leaving the now quiet halls behind. Despite the earlier chaos, everything seemed under control, but Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of more unexpected challenges ahead. As soon as he stepped outside, he heard the familiar voice of Mr. Aizawa calling him. Aizawa motioned for Izuku to come over. He turned to the group he was with and apologized, saying he would go meet Aizawa-sensei. Ida gave a supportive smile and nodded, encouraging him to take his time and hoping it wasn't trouble. Izuku hurried toward Aizawa, and the question that had been swirling in his mind since the announcement finally slipped out. He asked how reporters managed to break into the school, trying to make sense of it all. This was the top hero school. How could mere reporters breach their security? Aizawa glanced at him with his usual stoic demeanor, though Izuku could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. He admitted he didn't really know, and that was part of the problem. That's why he called Izuku. He needed his help to investigate and hoped it wasn't too much of a bother. Izuku responded that it wasn't a bother at all, nodding and expressing his eagerness to help. Aizawa turned and motioned for him to follow as they approached the entrance to the school. The scene was even more chaotic up close. The front gates, which were supposed to be nearly impenetrable, lay twisted and broken, pieces of metal strewn about as if torn apart by some unseen force. Nizu and other teachers were already there, their expressions grim as they surveyed the damage. Nizu's tiny frame stood tall against the destruction, his normally cheerful demeanor replaced with serious contemplation. He questioned how normal members of the press managed to break into the school, noting that they had checked them and found nothing suspicious. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, standing nearby, sighed heavily, wondering how a break-in could happen with their layers of security. Midnight suggested it might have been an instigation or possibly a villain trying to prove their worth. Her voice trailed off as her eyes landed on Izuku, and for a moment, she hesitated, likely out of professionalism. They had made a promise to maintain a professional relationship at school, despite their history outside of it. Nizu turned to Izuku, his eyes sharp despite the situation, and asked if he could help figure out what happened. Izuku responded without hesitation that he was already on it. He moved closer to the wreckage, feeling a tingling sensation as he activated one for all veins of energy spreading across the ruined gates. As he examined what was left, he sensed a strange residual energy lingering on the metal, like the remnants of some quirk. This wasn't typical damage, it wasn't brute force. Something else was at play here. Suddenly, unbidden memories flashed through his mind. Dark memories of the facility and the experiments. He winced slightly, trying to push the thoughts away. Midnight's voice cut through the haze, bringing him back to the present as she asked if he was okay. He took a deep breath, straightening up and forcing the memories away, assuring her he was fine. Focusing on the task at hand, he examined the energy more closely and concluded that whoever did this used some kind of decomposition quirk. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the term. Izuku clarified that it wasn't exactly decomposition, it was more like an acceleration of the natural breakdown of atoms in a structure. Every material would break down over time due to natural processes, but this quirk seemed to accelerate that process to an extreme degree. What would normally take decades or even centuries to weaken and break down happened in a matter of minutes. Nizu listened carefully, his eyes gleaming with interest as he processed Izuku's explanation. Izuku confirmed that the gate looked like this because it wasn't just torn apart by force, it had been weakened to the point of crumbling under its own weight. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 crossed his arms, deep in thought, acknowledging that it was a highly specific and dangerous quirk. Izuku noted that whoever did this either had extremely fine control over their quirk or was very experienced with it. The fact that it was used on such a large, reinforced structure indicated they were powerful. Midnight frowned, questioning why someone would use such a quirk just to let reporters into the school, deeming it overkill for something so mundane. Izuku suggested it might be a test, someone wanting to prove what they could do or perhaps send a message. Whoever did this might be showing them they could bypass 𝐒𝐻's security without breaking a sweat. Nizu's expression darkened slightly as he processed this thought, realizing the implications. Aizawa stated they should treat it as a serious matter until proven otherwise, emphasizing they couldn't afford to assume this was just a fluke. Nizu nodded, clearly already working through the implications, and asked Izuku to keep this information confidential for now to avoid causing more panic among the students. Izuku agreed, promising to keep it to himself. The teachers exchanged glances, each unsettled by the situation but remaining composed. Aizawa turned to Izuku again, commending him for his good work and stating that while they would continue their investigation, his input had been invaluable. He advised Izuku to head back to class for now. Izuku nodded, but as he started to turn away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. This breach wasn't random, whoever was behind it had a plan, and this was only the beginning. As he walked away from the scene, he clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. He needed to be ready for whatever came next. Meanwhile, Tomura Shigaraki gripped the edge of the counter with trembling fingers, his pale blue eyes narrowing with frustration as his MSDR's voice echoed through the darkened bar. His silver hair brushed against the grotesque, disfigured hand that covered most of his face, making the atmosphere feel even more suffocating. He growled that the plan was already in motion and that he had gathered a group of low-level thugs and wannabe villains just as his emissary wanted. They were eager and desperate, ready to throw themselves at the symbol of peace. All they needed was the right moment to crush All Might. On the other side of the room, 𝗬𝗓𝗏 silently cleaned glasses behind the bar, his vaporous form hovering ominously as the conversation continued. Shigaraki turned his attention back to the flickering monitor that transmitted only audio, his MSDR's voice cold and calculated as ever. The voice praised Shigaraki for his efforts but warned of a potential obstruction in their plans. Shigaraki's eyes widened in irritation as he drummed his fingers against the bar's surface. He demanded to know who could possibly stand in their way. The voice revealed that it was Subject 13, a creation of one of the MSDR's brilliant scientists, designed to possess the perfect quirk that could surpass even the strongest heroes. Shigaraki's brow furrowed as he processed the information. The voice explained that the experiment had gone awry, resulting in the creation turning against its maker, leading to the scientist's demise and the disappearance of Subject. This being, with its powerful and unpredictable quirk, had eluded them for years. Shigaraki sneered, a spark of interest igniting behind his rage. He questioned how Subject 13 could possibly be at UA. The voice revealed that Subject 13 was the offspring of one of the top heroes, hidden away from the public. Now, it had been confirmed that this individual was among the students of UA, posing a considerable threat to their plans. The voice expressed concern that Subject 13 might be too powerful for Shigaraki to handle alone. Shigaraki's hand twitched violently, brushing dangerously close to the glass he had been holding, which cracked under the pressure of his decay quirk. He growled through clenched teeth, insisting that he had been preparing for this moment, studying the heroes and learning everything necessary to bring down you. The voice acknowledged Shigaraki's capabilities but warned that this opponent should not be underestimated. To ensure success, the voice stated that assistance would be sent. Shigaraki froze, his body tensing as rage boiled within him. He refused to work with the individual being sent to help. The voice remained calm, stating that the mission's importance left no room for refusal. Shigaraki slammed his fist onto the counter, causing the bar to shake as parts of the wood began to disintegrate under his touch. He insisted that he could handle the situation alone, declaring that the other would only hinder their progress. The voice cut through Shigaraki's tirade, asserting that the decision was not up for debate. Failure was not an option, and he would have to work with the individual sent to assist him. Shigaraki's chest heaved with fury, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. The mere mention of the other sent waves of hatred coursing through him. He wanted to scream, to destroy everything around him, but he clenched his fist tightly until his knuckles turned white, expressing his distrust and refusal to allow the other near his operation. The voice coldly stated that trust was unnecessary, but collaboration was mandatory. Shigaraki's jaw tightened as resentment swirled in his mind, but he realized there was nothing he could do. His MSDR's words were final. He muttered his reluctant agreement, vowing to deal with the other once the mission was complete. The voice on the monitor chuckled quietly, almost amused, and reminded Shigaraki to focus on the task at hand. The monitor clicked off, leaving Shigaraki in the dimly lit bar, his rage simmering just below the surface. 𝗬𝗓𝗏, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke, reminding Shigaraki that the MSDR's orders were absolute and that they must ensure the success of the operation, no matter the cost. Shigaraki glared at the empty monitor, his lips curling into a snarl as he insisted that he didn't need anyone. But deep down, he knew his MSTR wouldn't change his mind. The other was coming, and that was something Shigaraki would have to deal with, whether he liked it or not.